I stood frozen in my kitchen doorway as my mother-in-law Sandra pushed past me with a notary, public spreading legal documents across my marble countertop. 24 hours after saying, "I do" to Derek, Sandra was demanding I sign over my $15 million inherited tech company. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind about keeping the business secret until I found true love. Sandra's calculated smile revealed this had been planned all along. The notary clicked his pen impatiently while I realized my fairy tale wedding was actually an elaborate financial trap. 6 months earlier, my world changed forever when Grandpa Thomas passed away and left me Data Flow Solutions, his revolutionary data management company. I was Bailey Crawford, 28 years old, working at Henderson's bookstore downtown, thinking my biggest worry was whether we'd hit our monthly sales target. Then the lawyers called. "Miss Crawford, your grandfather has bequeathed you his entire technology enterprise," the estate attorney explained in his mahogany-paneled office. "Current market valuation sits at approximately $15.2 million. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Grandpa Thomas had always been secretive about his work, mentioning something about computer systems for big corporations, but I never imagined the scope. He'd built data flow from nothing after retiring from IBM, creating software that helped companies organize massive amounts of information. However, the attorney continued, your grandfather included specific instructions. You're to tell absolutely nobody about this inheritance until you're certain you found genuine love. His exact words were, "Bailey will know when someone loves her for who she is, not what she owns." Those words haunted me as I signed the papers. Grandpa Thomas had watched his own children marry people who only wanted access to his wealth. He'd seen enough gold diggers to fill a mining operation. 3 weeks later, I met Derek Martinez at Sunrise Coffee on 5th Street. I was grabbing my usual vanilla latte before work when this gorgeous guy with warm brown eyes bumped into me, sending my drink flying. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," Derek exclaimed, his face flushing red. "Let me buy you another one. Actually, let me buy you 5 more. I'm usually way more coordinated than this." His nervous laughter was adorable. Derek stood about 6 feet tall with perfectly styled dark hair and the kind of smile that made my stomach flutter. He wore a simple blue button-down and jeans, nothing flashy or expensive. "1 replacement coffee will do just fine," I said, smiling back. We ended up talking for 2 hours. Derek worked in marketing for a small advertising firm, lived in a modest apartment across town, and shared my love for old mystery novels. He seemed genuinely interested when I told him about working at the bookstore, asking thoughtful questions about my favorite authors and whether I enjoyed recommending books to customers. "I'd love to see your store sometime," Derek said as we exchanged numbers, "and maybe take you to dinner this weekend if you're interested." The first date led to a second, then a third. Derek was everything I'd hoped for in a partner. He remembered little details about my life, brought me books he thought I'd enjoy, and never once asked about my financial situation. When I mentioned living in my grandfather's old house, Derek assumed it was a rental arrangement. "Your grandfather sounds like he was an amazing man," Derek said during our 4th date. "You light up whenever you talk about him." 2 months into our relationship, Derek introduced me to his family. His mother, Sandra, was a petite woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and sharp green eyes. She worked as a paralegal at Morrison & Associates downtown and carried herself with an air of professional authority. "So, Bailey, what do your parents do for work?" Sandra asked during our first dinner together. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 12, I explained. "My grandfather raised me after that." Sandra's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite identify. "Oh, how tragic. And your grandfather, what was his profession?" "He worked with computers," I said vaguely, following Grandpa Thomas's advice to keep things simple. Sandra nodded, but I noticed her asking Derek's younger sister Emma to write something down on a napkin. At the time, I assumed she was jotting down grocery items or weekend plans. The relationship moved quickly. Derek proposed after 4 months, presenting a beautiful but modest diamond ring. "Bailey, you make me want to be the best version of myself." he said down on one knee in the same coffee shop where we'd met. Will you marry me? I said yes without hesitation. Derek felt like the answer to every prayer I'd whispered since Grandpa Thomas died. He loved my quirky habit of reorganizing bookstore displays, laughed at my terrible cooking attempts, and held me when I cried missing my grandfather. But as we planned our wedding, Sandra's questions became more pointed. Bailey, honey, have you thought about what happens to your grandfather's house after the wedding? She asked during dress shopping. Real estate can be so complicated for newlyweds. We haven't really discussed it, I admitted. Well, you'll want to make sure everything's properly documented, Sandra continued. Derek mentioned your grandfather might have had some business investments. It's important to understand what you might be inheriting. The questions made me uncomfortable, but Derek always brushed off my concerns. Mom's just being practical, he'd say. She sees legal messes at work all the time and wants to make sure we're protected. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sandra suggested we have the ceremony at her house instead of the venue we'd booked. It'll be so much more intimate, she insisted. Plus, we can save money for your future together. Derek loved the idea, and I didn't want to seem difficult, so I agreed. Looking back, I realized Sandra was removing witnesses and creating a controlled environment for what came next. The wedding day itself was beautiful. Derek looked handsome in his navy suit. Sandra had decorated her backyard gorgeously, and our closest friends and family celebrated with us. Derek's vows brought tears to my eyes as he promised to love and protect me forever. But that evening, as we returned to my house after the reception, Derek seemed different, distracted. He kept checking his phone and glancing out the windows. Everything okay? I asked as we got ready for bed. Yeah, just tired, he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. The next morning, Derek left early for what he claimed was an emergency at work. Some client crisis, he explained, kissing my forehead. I'll be back this afternoon. An hour later, I heard Sandra's car in my driveway. She never visited without calling first, especially not this early. I was still in my pajamas when she knocked on the front door. Good morning, Bailey, Sandra said brightly, but something felt wrong. Behind her stood a short, balding man in a wrinkled suit carrying a leather briefcase. Sandra, what's going on? I asked, suddenly very awake. This is Harold Peterson, she said, pushing past me into my foyer. He's a notary public. We have some paperwork to take care of. That's when I noticed the determined look in her eyes, the same expression I'd seen when she argued with restaurant servers or demanded discounts at department stores. Sandra had always been pushy, but this felt different, predatory. What kind of paperwork? I asked, following them into my kitchen. Harold was already spreading documents across my counter, his movements practiced and efficient. Sandra pulled out a folder thick with papers and began organizing them with military precision. Well, dear, Sandra said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone I'd never heard before. Now that you and Derek are married, it's time to properly organize your assets. Derek has a right to half of everything you own, including that little computer business your grandfather left you. My blood turned to ice. I'd never told Derek about data flow solutions. I'd never mentioned the $15 million. I'd followed Grandpa Thomas's instructions perfectly, keeping the inheritance completely secret. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sandra's smile widened, and for the first time I saw something cold and calculating behind her green eyes. Oh, Bailey, sweet, naive Bailey. Did you really think we didn't know? Sandra's laugh sent chills down my spine as she pulled out a manila folder bulging with documents. Harold the notary arranged his stamp and seal on my granite countertop like he was setting up for surgery. You've been very clever, Bailey, Sandra said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, but not quite clever enough. I backed against my refrigerator, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I don't understand what's happening here. Data flow solutions, Sandra said, pulling out what looked like a corporate filing document. Inherited 6 months ago from Thomas Crawford, your grandfather. Current valuation $15.2 million. Annual revenue approximately $3.7 million. Shall I continue? The room started spinning. How could she possibly know these details? I'd been so careful, so secretive. The only people who knew were the estate lawyers, and they were bound by confidentiality agreements. Derek deserves his fair share. Sandra continued spreading more papers across my counter. After all, marriage is a partnership. What affects one spouse affects both. Derek doesn't know about any of this, I stammered. Oh, honey. Sandra tilted her head with mock sympathy. Derek has known since our second conversation about you. Did you think it was coincidence that he bumped into you at that coffee shop? The words hit me like a physical blow. Our meet-cute, the moment I'd treasured as fate bringing us together, had been orchestrated, planned, calculated. Harold cleared his throat. Ma'am, I need to explain these documents before you sign them. I'm not signing anything, I said, finding my voice. Sandra's expression hardened. Actually, you are. See, during your engagement, Derek paid for quite a few of your expenses. Dinners that weekend, trip to the mountains, your wedding dress, the ring adjustments. We have receipts for everything. She pulled out a stack of papers, each one documenting purchases I remembered. The romantic dinner at Luigi's where Derek insisted on paying. The weekend getaway where he surprised me with a prepaid hotel reservation. The dress alterations he'd offered to handle when the bridal shop called about payment. These weren't gifts, Bailey, Sandra said. They were loans, and according to state law, you owe Derek approximately $47,000 in immediate repayment. That's insane, I said. Those were normal relationship expenses. Derek never said anything about loans. Check your text messages from last week, Sandra suggested with a smirk. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. There it was, a message from Derek that I'd glanced at quickly during wedding preparations. Hey babe, just confirming the loan details we discussed. Love you. At the time, I'd assumed he was talking about something work-related and hadn't responded. Now I realized it was evidence he could point to if questioned. Since you obviously can't repay $47,000 working at a bookstore, Sandra continued, we're prepared to accept a transfer of 60% ownership in Dataflow Solutions as settlement. 60%? I gasped. Harold nodded professionally. The documents transfer controlling interest to Derek Martinez, your legal spouse. Very standard in these situations. What situations? I demanded. This isn't a situation, it's theft. Sandra's mask slipped for a moment, revealing something sharp and dangerous underneath. Careful, Bailey. Theft is a serious accusation. We wouldn't want you to say something you'd regret. Just then I heard Derek's key in the front door. My heart leaped with relief. He'd straighten this out. He'd tell his mother she was crazy and send Harold packing. Hey, babe, Derek called out, his voice unnaturally cheerful. How's everything going in here? Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his work clothes from that morning, but his expression wasn't confused or concerned. He looked prepared. Derek, thank God you're here, I said. Your mother has lost her mind. She's trying to make me sign over Grandpa Thomas's company. Derek's face went through a series of micro-expressions. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been genuine conflict. Then his features hardened into resolve. Bailey, he said quietly, we need to talk about this like adults. Adults. I stared at him in disbelief. Adults don't ambush their wives the day after their wedding with fake legal documents. They're not fake, Derek said. And this isn't an ambush. It's a conversation about our financial future. Sandra beamed at her son like he'd just won a spelling bee. Derek understands that marriage requires sacrifice and compromise. Derek, I said, my voice breaking, you're scaring me. This isn't you. This isn't the man I married. For a split second, Derek's resolve wavered. I saw the guy I'd fallen in love with, the one who brought me books and laughed at my terrible jokes. Then Sandra placed her hand on his shoulder, and the moment vanished. Bailey, I spent months getting to know you, Derek said. I invested time, money, and emotion into this relationship. I deserve something in return. You got me, I whispered. You got my love, my trust, my whole heart. Hearts don't pay bills, Sandra interjected. Dataflow Solutions does. Harold tapped his pen against the papers. Folks, I have other appointments today. If we're going to do this, we need to move forward. I stared at Derek, searching his face for any sign of the man I'd married less than 24 hours ago. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? The coffee shop, the proposal, everything. Derek couldn't meet my eyes. It started as research. Mom thought you might have family money. But then I got to know you, and I realized what I demanded. I realized you were even wealthier than we'd hoped, Sandra finished for him. The casual cruelty of her words stole my breath. I'd been evaluated, investigated, and targeted like prey. Every sweet moment, every shared laugh, every whispered promise had been calculated. Manipulation. I won't sign, I said firmly. Sandra's smile turned predatory. Oh, I think you will. See, refusing to pay your legal debts to Derek could be considered fraud. Harold here is also a licensed process server. He can have papers filed against you by end of business today. What papers? Lawsuit for loan default, asset hiding, and marriage fraud. Sandra rattled off like she was reading a grocery list. Of course, litigation can be expensive and public. Local newspapers love stories about inheritance disputes, especially involving young widows who inherit millions. The threat was clear. They'd destroy my reputation and drag me through court battles that could last years, even if I eventually won. Harold checked his watch. Ma'am, I really do need a decision. These documents are time-sensitive. I looked at the papers spread across my counter. Dense legal language filled page after page, but the bottom line was simple sign over controlling interest in my grandfather's life work or face financial and social destruction. How long have you been planning this? I asked Derek. Bailey, how long? Derek finally met my eyes, and I saw something that might have been shame. Since the week after we met. The whole relationship was a lie. Not all of it, Derek said quietly. I do care about you. You care about my money, I corrected. Sandra clapped her hands together. Enough drama. Bailey signed the papers. Derek, call your cousin at the courthouse and confirm he received our preliminary filing. What preliminary filing? I asked. Derek pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Hey Jake, it's Derek. Yeah, we're here now. She's being cooperative. Uh-huh. Okay, thanks. He hung up and looked at his mother. Jake says the documents are ready for filing if needed. I felt trapped, cornered by people who'd spent months preparing for this moment while I'd been planning a future based on love and trust. But then I remembered something Grandpa Thomas used to say, when people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. Derek and Sandra had just shown me exactly who they were. I need time to think, I said. No time, Sandra replied immediately. Harold has other clients waiting. Then Harold can leave, I said, walking toward my kitchen phone, and so can both of you. Sandra grabbed my wrist as I reached for the handset. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Bailey. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. For the first time, I felt genuinely afraid. Derek, I said, looking at my husband, are you going to let her hurt me? Derek looked uncomfortable, but made no move to intervene. Mom, maybe you should remember who paid for law school. Sandra snapped at her son. And who's been planning your future while you've been playing house with little Miss Bookworm here? The casual cruelty of the nickname stung more than it should have. But it also clarified something important. This wasn't really about Derek. This was about Sandra, and Derek was as much her victim as I was. What law school? I asked. Derek flushed red. That's not important right now. You told me you worked in marketing. He will work in marketing, Sandra said smoothly, marketing his own law practice once he passes the bar exam next month. Another lie, another deception. Another piece of the fantasy I'd been living crumbling away. Harold cleared his throat again. Folks, I'm going to need to charge overtime if this takes much longer. That's when I heard a car door slam outside. The sound of footsteps on my front porch made Sandra's eyes dart toward the window. She released my wrist but positioned herself between me and the kitchen door. Are you expecting someone? Sandra asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Before I could answer, my doorbell rang twice in quick succession. Then I heard a familiar voice calling through the door. "Bailey, it's Chloe. I brought coffee and those croissants you love." Relief flooded through me. Chloe Martinez was my best friend since college, my maid of honor, and the most observant person I knew. She'd been asking pointed questions about Derek's family since the engagement party. "Don't answer it," Sandra hissed, but I was already moving toward the front door. "Bailey, honey." Derek called after me, his voice strained. Maybe now isn't the best time for visitors. I ignored him and opened the door to find Chloe balancing a coffee tray and a bakery bag. Her curly red hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore her favorite vintage band t-shirt and jeans. The sight of her normal, everyday appearance in the middle of this surreal nightmare almost made me cry. "Hey, newlywed," Chloe said with a grin. "I figured you and Derek might want some good coffee instead of whatever you've got in your kitchen. How was the first night of married—" She stopped mid-sentence as she took in my appearance. I realized I was still in my pajamas. My hair was a mess, and I probably looked as panicked as I felt. "Bailey, what's wrong?" Chloe stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "You look terrible." "She's fine," Sandra called from the kitchen. "Just dealing with some family business." Chloe's eyebrows shot up. Family business at 9 in the morning in pajamas. She followed me back to the kitchen where Harold was organizing his notary supplies and Derek was pacing near the back door like a caged animal. "Well, this is cozy," Chloe said, setting down the coffee tray and surveying the scene. Her journalist instincts had always been sharp, and I could practically see her cataloging details. "Morning, Derek, Sandra, and you are—" "Harold Peterson, Notary, Public," Harold said, extending his hand, "just helping the family with some estate documentation." Chloe shook his hand, but her eyes were already scanning the papers spread across my counter. "Estate documentation, Bailey, did someone die?" "No one died," Sandra said quickly. "We're just organizing some assets now that Derek and Bailey are married." "What kind of assets?" Chloe asked, moving closer to the documents. I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. Chloe had always been able to read my signals, and right now I was desperately trying to communicate that something was very wrong. "Just some investments Bailey inherited," Derek said. "Nothing complicated." Chloe picked up one of the legal documents and scanned it. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she read. "This is a business ownership transfer form for Data Flow Solutions." My heart stopped. I'd never mentioned data flow to Chloe. I'd never mentioned it to anyone except the estate lawyers. "How do you know that name?" Sandra demanded. Chloe set down the paper and looked at me with concern. "Bailey, remember when I interviewed that tech entrepreneur last month for the newspaper, he mentioned Data Flow Solutions as one of the most innovative small companies in the state. Said it was privately held by some reclusive genius who refused interviews." She turned to Sandra with a cold smile. "Funny thing about working for the business section of the Herald, you get to know a lot about valuable local companies, including their ownership structures and recent inheritance transfers." Sandra's face had gone pale. "I don't know what you think you understand, but I understand that Data Flow Solutions is worth approximately $15 million, Chloe said calmly. "I understand that it was recently inherited by one Bailey Crawford from her grandfather, Thomas Crawford. And I understand that no sane person signs over a $15 million company the day after their wedding unless something very bad is happening." Harold started packing up his notary supplies. "Perhaps I should reschedule for another time." "You're not going anywhere," Sandra snapped at him. Then she turned to Chloe. "This is a private family matter." "Is it?" Chloe crossed her arms. "Because it looks like fraud to me." Derek stepped forward. "Chloe, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Am I? Then explain it to me, Derek. Explain why your mother brought a notary to pressure your wife into signing away her inheritance less than 24 hours after your wedding." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of my refrigerator. Derek opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. Sandra recovered first. "Bailey owes Derek money from their relationship, documented loans that need to be repaid." "Really?" Chloe picked up the stack of receipts. Dinner at Luigi's hotel booking for mountain weekend bridal shop alterations. These look like normal dating expenses to me. They were loans, Sandra insisted. Derek has text messages confirming the arrangement. Chloe turned to me. Bailey, did you agree to borrow money from Derek for these things? No, I said quietly. He insisted on paying. He said he wanted to take care of me. So no loan agreement, no terms discussed, no promissory notes signed, Chloe summarized. Just a guy paying for dates and then claiming they were loans after he married a wealthy woman. Sandra's professional composure was cracking. You have no legal training. You don't understand how these things work. Actually, I minored in business law, Chloe replied, and I've covered enough courthouse stories to recognize a scam when I see one. She turned to Harold. Sir, are you aware that notarizing documents under fraudulent circumstances is a felony? Harold's face went white. I was told this was a legitimate estate matter. Does it look legitimate to you, forcing someone to sign ownership documents while they're in their pajamas with no legal representation present? Harold started backing toward the door. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There certainly has, Sandra said, her voice rising. This little journalist friend of yours has no idea what she's talking about. But I could see panic in Sandra's eyes. Chloe's arrival had disrupted their carefully planned timeline, and now they were improvising badly. Chloe pulled out her phone. Bailey, I think you should call your lawyer, right now. She doesn't need a lawyer, Derek said quickly. This is just family discussing finances. Family doesn't threaten litigation to steal inheritances, Chloe replied. She was already dialing. Hi, this is Chloe Martinez from the Herald. I need to speak with Tom Rodriguez about an urgent matter regarding one of his clients. Yes, Bailey Crawford. It's an emergency. Sandra lunged for Chloe's phone, but Chloe stepped back smoothly. Tom, thank God, I'm at Bailey's house and there's a situation. Yes, they're trying to force her to sign ownership transfer documents. No, she doesn't have representation present. Uh-huh. Okay, we'll wait for you. She hung up and looked at Sandra with satisfaction. Bailey's estate attorney is on his way, along with a police officer since forced document signing is considered coercion under state law. You have no right to interfere in our family business, Sandra snarled. Bailey is my family, Chloe replied firmly. And Derek, if you care about her at all, you'll put a stop to this before it goes any further. Derek looked torn between his mother and his conscience. We just thought... You thought you could steal $15 million and get away with it, Chloe finished. Bailey, go get dressed. Don't sign anything until Tom gets here. I nodded and headed toward my bedroom, my legs shaking with adrenaline and relief. As I reached the hallway, I heard Sandra's voice behind me. This isn't over, Bailey, not even close. The tone of her voice made my blood run cold. This woman had spent months planning to steal my inheritance, and she wasn't going to give up just because Chloe had disrupted one attempt. As I pulled on jeans and a sweater, I realized that Sandra's casual mention of Derek's law school wasn't random information. She'd revealed it as a threat, a reminder that they had long-term plans that went far beyond this morning's confrontation. I was dealing with people who thought in terms of years, not days. And they'd already demonstrated they were willing to lie, manipulate, and coerce to get what they wanted. The question was, what else were they willing to do? I was pulling on my shoes when I heard raised voices from the kitchen. Chloe's clear, confident tone mixed with Sandra's increasingly shrill protests. Derek's voice was harder to make out, but he sounded like he was trying to mediate between them. By the time I returned to the kitchen, Harold had completely packed up his supplies and was hovering near the back door, like he wanted to escape through the yard. The police will want to question you, Chloe was telling him. I'd stick around if I were you. Question me about what? Harold asked nervously. I haven't done anything wrong. That depends on how much you knew about this scam beforehand, Chloe replied. Sandra whipped around to face her. Scam, how dare you? My son has every legal right to marital assets. Marital assets, yes, but not assets obtained through fraud and coercion, Chloe said. There's a big difference. I noticed Derek had been unusually quiet during this exchange. He was standing by the window, staring out at my backyard like he was memorizing the landscape. "Derek," I said quietly, "what are you thinking?" He turned to look at me, and for a moment I saw the vulnerable man I'd thought I'd married. "Bailey, this wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen?" I asked. Derek glanced at his mother, who was glaring at him with warning in her eyes. I thought you'd want to share everything. That's what married couples do." "Sure, yes," I said, "but not because of threats and fake loan documents." "The loans aren't fake," Sandra interjected. "Derek has every right to expect repayment." Chloe laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, I've seen actual loan documentation. What you've got here are dinner receipts and hotel confirmations. No reasonable court would consider those binding loan agreements." "You're not a lawyer," Sandra snapped. "Neither are you," Chloe replied. "You're a paralegal. I looked you up while Bailey was getting dressed." Sandra's face went pale. "How did you—" "Morrison and Associates has a staff directory on their website," Chloe said casually. "Sandra Martinez, Paralegal Estate and Probate Division, 15 years experience, which means you know exactly how inheritance law works and you know what you're trying to do here is illegal." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of cars passing on the street outside. I could see Sandra's mind working, probably calculating whether she could still salvage this situation. "Derek," Sandra said finally, "tell your wife that you love her and want to build a future together. Tell her that sharing financial responsibilities is part of marriage." Derek looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Bailey, I do love you." "Do you?" I asked. "Or do you love the idea of being married to someone with $15 million? "That's not fair," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. Before I could respond, we heard cars pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I could see a sedan and a police cruiser parking behind Sandra's car. "That'll be Tom and the officer," Chloe said with satisfaction. Sandra's composure finally cracked completely. "This is ridiculous. We're family now. Families work things out privately. Families don't ambush each other with notaries the day after weddings," I said. The doorbell rang and I went to answer it. Tom Rodriguez, my estate attorney, stood on the porch with a uniformed police officer. Tom was in his 60s with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd handled Grandpa Thomas's estate with compassion and professionalism. "Bailey," Tom said, his voice full of concern. "Are you all right?" "I think so," I said. "But there are some people in my kitchen who seem to think they're entitled to my inheritance." The police officer, whose name tag read Patterson, was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Ma'am, I understand there's been some kind of dispute involving legal documents." "That's right," I said, leading them toward the kitchen. "My mother-in-law brought a notary and tried to pressure me into signing ownership transfer papers." As we entered the kitchen, Harold immediately stepped forward. "Officer, I want to make it clear that I had no knowledge of any impropriety. I was told this was a standard estate matter." Officer Patterson looked around the room, taking in the scattered papers, Sandra's defensive posture, and Derek's guilty expression. "Who called for notary services?" "I did," Sandra said, lifting her chin defiantly. "My son has a legal right to his wife's assets." Tom Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Martinez, that's not accurate. California is a community property state, but assets acquired before marriage remain separate property unless specifically commingled." "The company was inherited after they started dating," Sandra argued. "But before they were married," Tom replied patiently, "and Miss Crawford took no action to commingle the asset with marital property. Data Flow Solutions remains her separate property." Officer Patterson was examining the documents spread across my counter. "These appear to be ownership transfer forms. Ma'am, did you request these documents be prepared?" "No," I said firmly. "I never agreed to transfer ownership of anything." "What about these loan documents?" Officer Patterson held up Sandra's stack of receipts. Tom took the papers and scanned them quickly. These are standard commercial receipts. There's no loan agreement here, no terms specified, no signatures indicating borrowed funds. Derek has text messages, Sandra said desperately. May I see them? Officer Patterson asked. Derek reluctantly pulled out his phone and showed her the message he'd sent me about loan details. Officer Patterson read it and raised an eyebrow. This message doesn't specify loan terms, amounts, or repayment schedules, she observed. It's too vague to constitute a binding agreement. Sandra was growing increasingly agitated. This is harassment. We're trying to have a private family discussion. Ma'am. Officer Patterson said calmly, attempting to coerce someone into signing legal documents through false claims and intimidation is a crime, especially when those documents involve millions of dollars in assets. No one was coerced, Derek said quickly. Bailey, tell them no one forced you to do anything. I looked at my husband, this man I'd promised to love and honor just yesterday, and felt my heart break a little more. Derek, your mother grabbed my wrist when I tried to make a phone call. She threatened to sue me and destroy my reputation if I didn't sign. How is that not coercion? Derek's face crumpled. Bailey, I never wanted it to go this far. How far did you want it to go? I asked. Before Derek could answer, Sandra stepped between us. Enough. Derek, we're leaving. This was obviously a mistake. Actually, Officer Patterson said, I'd like everyone to stay while I take statements. Mr. Peterson, I'll need you to explain your role in this situation. Harold looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I was contacted yesterday evening and asked to come here this morning to notarize some estate documents. I was told it was a standard transfer between spouses. Who contacted you? Officer Patterson asked. Harold glanced nervously at Sandra. Mrs. Martinez. She said she was the mother-in-law and that everything had been arranged with the family lawyer. Tom Rodriguez frowned. I'm Miss Crawford's estate attorney, and I wasn't consulted about any document transfers. Mrs. Martinez told me the family attorney would meet us here, Harold continued. When I arrived and didn't see another attorney present, I should have asked more questions. Officer Patterson was taking notes. Mr. Peterson, in the future, I'd recommend verifying the identity of all parties and ensuring independent legal representation before notarizing valuable asset transfers. Yes, ma'am, Harold said miserably. Sandra made one last desperate play. Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. Derek and Bailey are newlyweds working out their financial arrangements. These documents were just drafts for discussion purposes. Drafts that you brought a notary to execute, Chloe pointed out. Seems like you were planning to make them official. Tom Rodriguez cleared his throat. Officer Patterson, I'd like to document this incident in case there are future attempts to claim legitimate ownership of my client's assets. Good idea. Officer Patterson agreed. She turned to Sandra and Derek. I'm not making any arrests today, but I want to be very clear. Any future attempts to obtain Miss Crawford's assets through deception, coercion, or fraudulent documentation will result in criminal charges. Sandra's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous. Derek, get your things. We're leaving. My things. Derek looked confused. You're not staying here after this circus, Sandra snapped. I felt a stab of pain as I realized Sandra was right. How could Derek stay in my house after what had just happened? How could I trust him with my coffee maker, let alone my heart? Derek looked at me with something that might have been genuine regret. Bailey, can we talk privately? I glanced at Officer Patterson, who nodded. Just stay where I can see you. Derek and I walked to the far side of the kitchen near the breakfast nook where we'd shared so many morning conversations during our brief marriage. Bailey. Derek said quietly, I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. What is it then? I asked. Derek ran his hands through his hair, destroying his usually perfect styling. My mom. She's always been intense about money. After my dad left, she had to work 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She sees financial security as survival. That doesn't excuse what happened here, Derek. I know, he said quickly. But when she found out about your inheritance, she convinced me that you were hiding it because you didn't trust me. She said if you really loved me, You'd want to share everything. I stared at my husband, searching for any sign of the man I'd fallen in love with. Derek, I was following my grandfather's advice to keep the inheritance secret until I was sure about someone's motives. This morning proved he was right. Derek's shoulders sagged. I messed up everything, didn't I? Before I could answer, Sandra's voice cut across the kitchen. Derek, let's go now. Derek looked back at his mother, then at me. For a moment, I thought he might choose to stay and fight for our marriage. Instead, he nodded sadly. I'll come back for my clothes later, he said, if that's okay. Call first, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. As Sandra, Derek, and Harold filed out of my kitchen, Officer Patterson finished her notes and handed me a report number. Tom Rodriguez gathered up all the fraudulent documents, promising to keep them as evidence. After everyone left except Chloe, I collapsed into one of my kitchen chairs and finally let myself cry. Hey, Chloe said softly, rubbing my back. It's going to be okay. My marriage is over, I sobbed. It lasted exactly 1 day. Your marriage was over before it started, Chloe said gently. You just didn't know it yet. As the reality of the situation sank in, I realized that Chloe was right. But I also realized something else. Sandra's retreat felt too easy, too convenient. People who spend months planning to steal $15 million don't give up after one failed attempt. They regroup, reassess, and attack from a different angle. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 days passed in a strange fog of silence. Derek hadn't called, hadn't come by for his clothes, hadn't even sent a text message. I'd taken time off from the bookstore, unable to focus on customer recommendations, when my own life had become a thriller novel with a plot I couldn't predict. Chloe had been checking on me daily, bringing groceries and making sure I was eating. On Thursday afternoon, she arrived with her laptop bag and a determined expression. Okay, wallowing time is over, she announced, setting up her computer on my dining room table. We need to figure out what we're really dealing with here. What do you mean? I asked, curling up on my couch with a cup of tea. I mean, Sandra Martinez didn't just wake up Sunday morning and decide to steal your inheritance. This was planned, Bailey, carefully planned, and I want to know how long they've been doing this. Chloe opened her laptop and started typing. I've been doing some digging since Monday. Want to know what I found? I joined her at the table, curious despite my emotional exhaustion. What kind of digging? The fun kind. Public records, court filings, property transfers, marriage licenses. Chloe's fingers flew across the keyboard. Derek Martinez has been engaged 3 times in the past 5 years. My stomach dropped. 3 times. Christine Walsh in 2019 engaged for 4 months. Rebecca Chen in 2021 engaged for 6 months. And Amanda Foster last year engaged for 3 months. Chloe pulled up a spreadsheet with dates and names. All 3 engagements ended abruptly with no wedding announcements or divorce filings. Maybe he just had commitment issues, I said weakly. That's what I thought too, until I looked deeper. Chloe clicked to another tab. Christine Walsh inherited her grandmother's antique shop 2 months before she met Derek, worth approximately $400,000. She scrolled to the next entry. Rebecca Chen inherited her father's restaurant chain 6 weeks before Derek bumped into her at a farmer's market, worth approximately $2.3 million. My hands started shaking. And Amanda Foster inherited her aunt's investment portfolio 1 month before Derek happened to spill coffee on her at a downtown cafe, worth approximately $800,000. The pattern was unmistakable. Derek had a type, and it wasn't brunettes or book lovers. It was recently bereaved women with substantial inheritances. How did you find all this? I asked. Inheritance records are public in most counties if you know where to look, Chloe explained. And I've gotten pretty good at connecting dots through social media wedding announcements and obituaries. Derek's mother has helped him target women whose inheritances were recent enough that they might still be emotionally vulnerable. I felt sick. Every sweet moment of our relationship had been orchestrated, calculated, planned. Did any of them actually marry him? Nope. All 3 engagements ended suddenly, and all 3 women moved away from the area within a year. Chloe looked at me seriously. Bailey, I think you were supposed to be different. The big score. 15 million is more than all his previous targets combined. What happened to the other women? Did they lose their inheritances? Chloe's expression grew grim. That's where it gets interesting. I managed to track down Rebecca Chen. She's living in Portland now, working as a graphic designer. You talked to her? Yesterday. She was hesitant at first, but when I mentioned Derek's name, she opened up. Chloe pulled out her phone. I recorded our conversation with her permission. She hit play, and a woman's voice filled my dining room, clear but cautious. Derek seemed perfect at first. Attentive, romantic, genuinely interested in my life and my family's history. But about 2 months into our relationship, strange things started happening. What kind of strange things? Chloe's voice asked. Financial irregularities, credit checks I hadn't authorized. Someone tried to access my business accounts using personal information only Derek knew. When I confronted him about it, he claimed his mother was helping him understand my financial situation so he could be supportive. My blood ran cold. Sandra had been gathering intelligence on all of Derek's targets. Did you ever meet his family? Chloe asked on the recording. Oh yes. His mother, Sandra, was very interested in my restaurant business. She asked detailed questions about profit margins, property values, expansion plans. At the time, I thought she was just trying to understand my work. The recording continued with Rebecca describing how Derek's family had gradually inserted themselves into her business decisions, offering legal advice and financial planning services. The breaking point came when Sandra brought a business consultant to Sunday dinner. Rebecca continued. This consultant had drawn up plans to restructure my restaurants, including bringing Derek on as a managing partner. When I said I wasn't interested, Sandra became hostile. She accused me of not trusting Derek, of being selfish with my family's legacy. What did you do? Chloe asked. I broke up with Derek that night, but the harassment didn't stop. Sandra called my restaurant managers, claiming to represent Derek in some kind of business dispute. She contacted my suppliers, spreading rumors about financial problems. It got so bad I had to sell the restaurants and start over somewhere else. The recording ended and I stared at Chloe in horror. They destroyed her business. Not directly, but they made it impossible for her to operate normally. Rebecca thinks Sandra was trying to force her into accepting Derek as a partner by making independent operation too difficult. I searched for words. That's sociopathic. It gets worse. Chloe opened another file. I also spoke with Christine Walsh. She lost her antique shop under similar circumstances, though she doesn't think Derek and Sandra were directly responsible. But Amanda Foster, she's dead Bailey. The room went silent except for the hum of my refrigerator. Dead. Car accident 6 months after her engagement to Derek ended. Single car crash on a mountain road, no witnesses. Police ruled it an accident, but Amanda had been receiving threatening phone calls in the weeks before her death. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my teacup. You think Derek's family killed her? I think Amanda knew something that made her dangerous to them, Chloe said carefully, and I think we need to be very careful about how we proceed. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at my quiet neighborhood street. Everything looked normal. Kids riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, mail carriers making their rounds. But underneath that normalcy, predators were hunting. Chloe, what if Derek comes back? What if Sandra tries something else? That's why we're not waiting around to find out, Chloe said firmly. We're going to gather evidence and take it to the authorities before they have a chance to regroup. What kind of evidence? Chloe grinned, and I recognized the expression from our college days when she was about to suggest something dangerous and probably illegal. The kind that proves Derek and Sandra Martinez are running a multi-state inheritance fraud scheme. How do we prove that? By finding their other victims. Rebecca mentioned that Sandra asked detailed questions about her family history and financial background. Those questions had to come from somewhere. Sandra's been researching targets probably for years. Chloe pulled up another screen on her laptop. I've been tracking unusual patterns in recent inheritance transfers and engagement announcements across California, Nevada, and Arizona. There are at least 12 other cases that fit the profile. 12. My voice came out as a whisper. Young women inheriting substantial assets followed by whirlwind romances with men who have connections to Sandra Martinez. Some married, some didn't. But in every case where the woman refused to transfer assets, bad things happened to their businesses or personal lives. I sank back down into my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what Chloe was describing. This isn't just about Derek lying to me about his feelings. This is organized crime. Exactly. And you, my friend, are the first target who figured it out before signing anything over. Chloe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Which makes you incredibly valuable as a witness, but also incredibly dangerous to them. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it immediately. Bailey, this is Derek. We need to talk. Can I come over tonight? There are things about my family you need to understand. I showed the message to Chloe, who frowned. That's interesting timing. You think he knows we've been investigating? I think Derek Martinez is either growing a conscience or getting scared, Chloe said. Either way, we need to be smart about how we handle this. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Derek. Please, Bailey, I know you have no reason to trust me, but there are things about my mother that even I didn't know until this week. I think we're both in danger. Chloe and I looked at each other across the table. Outside, the afternoon sun was starting to fade, casting long shadows across my dining room. What do you think? I asked. I think, Chloe said slowly, that Derek Martinez just became either our best source of information or our biggest threat, and we need to figure out which one before we let him back into your house. I stared at Derek's message for a long moment before showing it to Chloe. He says we're both in danger. What does that mean? Chloe was already typing on her laptop. I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. Before we respond to Derek, we need insurance. What kind of insurance? The kind that keeps us alive if this goes sideways. Chloe's fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm sending everything we've found to my editor at the Herald, along with instructions to publish it if anything happens to either of us. The reality of our situation hit me like a physical blow. 3 days ago, my biggest worry was whether to serve chicken or fish at my wedding reception. Now I was discussing contingency plans in case someone tried to kill me. Chloe, maybe we should just go to the police with what we have. We will. But first we need more concrete evidence. Right now we have a pattern of suspicious behavior, but no smoking gun. If Derek's willing to talk, this could be our chance to get solid proof. My phone buzzed again. Derek, Bailey, please. I found something in my mother's house that you need to see. Something about your grandfather. That got my attention. Something about Grandpa Thomas. What could Sandra possibly have about him? Chloe read the message over my shoulder. Only one way to find out, but we're not meeting Derek alone and we're not meeting him here. Where then? Somewhere public with lots of witnesses. Chloe thought for a moment. The coffee shop where you two first met. Ironic justice. I typed back, meet me at Sunrise Coffee at 7 p.m., come alone. Derek's response was immediate, thank you, I'll bring everything. Chloe was already making phone calls. Tom, it's Chloe Martinez. Yes, Bailey's friend. We need to meet before 7 tonight. No, I can't explain over the phone. Sunrise Coffee on 5th Street. Bring whatever recording equipment you have. She hung up and dialed another number. Mom, I need a favor. Can you and Dad be at Sunrise Coffee tonight around 7? Just order drinks and sit near the back. I'll explain later. Yes, it's important. Love you too. You're bringing your parents, I asked. My parents, my editor, probably half the Herald staff by the time I'm done calling. Chloe grinned grimly. If Derek Martinez wants to confess to inheritance fraud, he's going to do it in front of plenty of witnesses. We spent the next 2 hours preparing. Chloe briefed Tom Rodriguez on everything we'd discovered while I tried to mentally prepare for seeing Derek again. Part of me still couldn't believe the sweet, attentive man I'd married was part of a criminal conspiracy. At 6:45, we arrived at Sunrise Coffee. Chloe had been right to suggest it. The place was busy with the dinner crowd, and Tom Rodriguez was already seated at a corner table with what looked like professional recording equipment disguised as a laptop bag. Chloe's parents, Jim and Maria Martinez, were at a table near the back, both reading newspapers like they were there for their evening coffee routine. Chloe's editor, Sarah Chen, was at the counter ordering an elaborate drink that would take several minutes to prepare. "This feels like overkill," I whispered to Chloe. "There's no such thing as overkill when dealing with people who might have murdered someone," she whispered back. At exactly 7 o'clock, Derek walked through the front door. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He spotted me immediately and walked over to our table carrying a manila envelope thick with documents. "Bailey," he said, his voice hoarse, "thank you for meeting me." "Derek," I kept my voice neutral, "you said you found something about my grandfather." Derek glanced around the coffee shop, noticing the unusual number of people who seemed to be paying attention to our conversation. "Are all these people here because of me?" "I'm not taking any chances," I said. "After Monday morning, I don't think that's unreasonable." Derek nodded sadly. "You're right. Bailey, I need to start by saying I'm sorry. What happened at your house was wrong and I should have stopped it." "Why didn't you—" Derek ran his hands through his hair, the gesture I used to find endearing, but now recognized as a sign of his anxiety. "Because I was weak, and because I didn't know how deep this whole thing went until after we left your house." He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. "When I got home Monday, I was angry. At you, at Chloe, at the whole situation. I felt like my mother had been right that you were being selfish by hiding your inheritance." Derek paused, looking ashamed. "So I went through her office looking for the legal documents she'd mentioned, planning to take them to a real lawyer and force the issue properly. And what did you find?" "This." Derek spread the first document on our small table. It was a typed report several pages long with my grandfather's name at the top. I leaned forward to read it, and my blood ran cold. It was a detailed background investigation of Thomas Crawford, including his business holdings, personal relationships, health records, and daily routines. Sandra had my grandfather investigated 3 years ago, Derek confirmed. "This report includes his medical history, his financial records, his will, everything. It even has surveillance photos of him at the grocery store and the pharmacy." My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. There were photos of Grandpa Thomas that had clearly been taken without his knowledge. Pictures of him entering his doctor's office, meeting with his lawyer, even sitting in his favorite chair reading the newspaper. "Derek, why would your mother investigate my grandfather 3 years ago? We didn't even know each other then." Derek pulled out another document. "Because she was tracking inheritance patterns. Look at this." It was a spreadsheet listing dozens of names, ages, estimated inheritance values, and what looked like vulnerability assessments. I scanned the list and found Christine Walsh, Rebecca Chen, and Amanda Foster. And there, near the bottom, was my name. "She's been planning this for years," I whispered. "Bailey, there's more." Derek's voice was barely audible. "Much more." He pulled out a thick folder labeled Thomas Crawford Operational Plan. Inside were detailed schedules, surveillance reports, and what appeared to be medical records. "Derek," I said, my voice shaking, "these medical records are from the week before my grandfather died." Derek nodded miserably. "Bailey, I think my mother knew your grandfather was going to die before you did." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm, too public for this conversation. I looked at the medical records, noting references to experimental medications and treatment protocols I didn't recognize. How did she get these medical records are protected by privacy laws? My mother has connections at several hospitals and medical facilities. She's worked in estate law for 15 years, and she's built relationships with people who have access to confidential information. Chloe leaned forward. "Derek, are you suggesting your mother had advance knowledge of Mr. Crawford's death?" Derek met her eyes reluctantly. I'm suggesting my mother may have done more than just wait for Mr. Crawford to die naturally. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think Sandra killed my grandfather? I think Sandra has been involved in suspicious deaths before, Derek said quietly, and I think Thomas Crawford wasn't her first victim. He pulled out one final document, a newspaper clipping from 2 years ago. The headline read, "Local business owner dies in apparent heart attack." "This is Robert Foster," Derek explained, Amanda Foster's uncle who left her the investment portfolio. I read the article quickly. Robert Foster, age 67, had died suddenly of cardiac arrest while hiking alone. He'd been in good health with no history of heart problems. The same week Robert Foster died, Derek continued, my mother made a large cash deposit to her personal bank account, $15,000. Chloe was taking notes frantically. Where did the money come from? I don't know, but it wasn't from her salary at Morrison and Associates. Derek looked directly at me. Bailey, I found similar deposits corresponding to the deaths of 5 other elderly people whose inheritances ended up targeted by our operation. The word operation sent chills down my spine. This wasn't just fraud, this was systematic murder for profit. Derek, I said carefully, why are you telling me this? Why now? Derek's composure finally cracked completely. Because yesterday my mother asked me to get information about your daily routine, your exercise schedule, your work schedule, your medical history. She wants to know when you're alone and vulnerable. The coffee shop around us faded to background noise as the true scope of my danger became clear. Sandra Martinez hadn't given up on my inheritance. She was planning something much worse than document fraud. I think, Derek said, his voice breaking, my mother is planning to kill you, Bailey, and I think she's going to do it soon. The drive back to my house felt like it lasted hours, even though it was only 10 minutes. Derek followed us in his car, the manila envelope of evidence secure in Chloe's possession. Tom Rodriguez had made copies of everything at the coffee shop and was already on the phone with law enforcement contacts. We need to search Sandra's house, Chloe said as we pulled into my driveway. If Derek's right about what she's planning, there might be more evidence there. Absolutely not, I said immediately. Chloe, if Sandra has killed people, breaking into her house could get us killed too. Derek parked behind us and approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. Actually, he said, we might not need to break in. I still have a key and Sandra is working late tonight on a case filing. You want us to burglarize your mother's house? I asked. I want us to stop my mother from committing murder, Derek replied. Bailey, if we wait for the police to get search warrants, Sandra will have time to destroy evidence and disappear. These people have been operating across multiple states for years. They have escape plans. Chloe was already making phone calls. Tom, we need to move fast. No, we can't wait. Derek has access to Sandra's house and she's not home. I know it's risky, but we're talking about preventing a murder here. She hung up and turned to us. Tom's contacting a detective he knows, but Derek's right. By the time they get proper warrants, Sandra could be gone. I looked at Derek, trying to read his expression in the dim light of my driveway. How do I know this isn't another trap? How do I know you're not working with Sandra to get me somewhere isolated? Derek pulled out his phone and showed me a text message thread. Because of this. The messages were between Derek and Sandra, time-stamped from that afternoon. Sandra, where are you? We need to discuss next steps. Derek, I need time to think about what happened Monday. Sandra, there's no time. The situation requires immediate action. Derek, what kind of action? Sandra, the permanent kind. Come home tonight at 10. Bring gloves. I felt the blood drain from my face. Bring gloves. My mother never asked me to bring gloves unless she's planning something that can't leave fingerprints, Derek said grimly. Chloe read the messages over my shoulder. Okay, that's definitely not a request to help with gardening. Derek, what does your mother usually mean when she says permanent solutions? Derek's face was pale in the porch light. I honestly don't know. Until this week, I thought my mother was just aggressive about business opportunities. I never suspected she might be... He couldn't finish the sentence. A serial killer, I completed for him. We need to call the police right now, I said, but Derek shook his head. Bailey, think about it logically. What evidence do we actually have that would convince police to arrest Sandra immediately? Suspicious bank deposits, stolen medical records, and vague text messages about bringing gloves. He was right, and that terrified me. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we gather concrete evidence tonight while Sandra thinks I'm on her side, Derek said. If she's planning to kill you, there will be evidence of that plan in her house. Weapons, detailed surveillance information, maybe even records of previous murders. Chloe was practically vibrating with nervous energy. This is insane. This is also the biggest story of my career and possibly the only way to save your life. I'm in. Chloe, I can't ask you to risk your life for this. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. She looked at Derek seriously. But if this goes wrong, if this is a setup, I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Derek nodded. Understood. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing to the plan. We would follow Derek to Sandra's house, search for evidence while she was at work, and get out before she returned. Simple, quick, relatively safe. Famous last words. Sandra lived in a modest 2-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood about 15 minutes from downtown. As we parked across the street, I noticed several things that made me nervous. The house was dark except for a single light in what looked like a home office. The yard was meticulously maintained with security cameras visible near the front door and garage. Those cameras aren't just for show, Chloe observed. Your mother takes security seriously. Derek nodded. She's always been paranoid about people discovering her business activities, but I know the alarm code and the camera blind spots. We waited until the neighborhood was completely quiet before approaching the house. Derek led us through a side gate and around to the back door, avoiding the security camera's field of view. Office is upstairs, Derek whispered as he unlocked the door. But we should check the basement first. That's where she keeps her really private files. The basement was finished with industrial carpeting and fluorescent lighting. Filing cabinets lined one wall and a large desk dominated the center of the room. What immediately caught my attention, though, were the maps. 3 entire walls were covered with detailed maps of California, Nevada, and Arizona, marked with colored pins and handwritten notes. Red pins seemed to indicate completed projects, while yellow pins marked current targets. Jesus Christ, Chloe whispered, pulling out her phone to take pictures. This is a war room. I found my grandfather's house marked with a red pin. Nearby notations included Thomas Crawford, completed 6/15, and Bailey Crawford in progress. Derek was going through the filing cabinets while Chloe photographed the maps. Bailey, you need to see this, he called softly. He'd opened a drawer labeled Current Operations and pulled out a thick folder with my name on it. Inside were surveillance photos of me going to work, grocery shopping, visiting friends. There were copies of my medical records, my employment history, even transcripts of phone conversations I'd had with Chloe. She's been watching me for months, I whispered, flipping through photo after photo of my daily routine. Look at the dates, Derek said. Some of these photos were taken before you and I even met. He was right. The earliest surveillance photos were dated 4 months before our coffee shop meeting. Sandra had been planning my targeting long before Derek made contact. Chloe found another filing cabinet filled with folders bearing women's names, Christine, Rebecca, Amanda, and at least 20 others I didn't recognize. Derek, Chloe said urgently, Amanda Foster's folder has newspaper clippings about her death and financial documents showing large cash transfers to offshore accounts. I opened Amanda's folder and immediately wished I hadn't. Along with the newspaper clippings were detailed photographs of the crash site, far more detailed than would have been available to the public. These photos were taken from inside the police tape, I observed. How did Sandra get access to crime scene photos? Derek was pale. My cousin Jake works for the county coroner's office. I thought he just helped Sandra with inheritance research, but he's been providing inside information about deaths that Sandra may have caused. Chloe finished. We worked quickly, photographing documents and copying files while keeping one ear open for Sandra's return. The scope of the operation was staggering. Sandra had been running inheritance fraud schemes for at least 6 years, targeting dozens of women across 3 states. Then Derek found the smoking gun. "Bailey," he called urgently, "you need to see this right now." He was holding a medical file with my grandfather's name on it, but these weren't the records from his regular doctor. These were notes from a private medical consultant documenting the effects of various medications on elderly cardiac patients. "These are experimental drug trial records," I said, scanning the technical language. "Derek, these drugs are designed to simulate heart attacks in people with existing cardiac conditions." The file included dosage charts, administration methods, and timeline projections. At the bottom of the last page, someone had handwritten, "Thomas Crawford, Protocol 7, administered 6/10, anticipated effect 6/15. My grandfather had died on June 15th, 5 days after someone had given him experimental cardiac drugs. Sandra murdered my grandfather. I said the words feeling surreal even as I spoke them. Chloe was photographing everything frantically. "This is enough evidence to convict her of murder. We need to get out of here and get this to the police immediately." That's when we heard a car door slam outside. Derek checked his watch. "She's home early. We need to leave now." We quickly gathered the most incriminating documents and headed for the back door. But as we reached the kitchen, the front door opened and we heard Sandra's voice. "Derek, I saw your car outside. Are you here?" Derek gestured for us to hide behind the kitchen island while he went to meet his mother. "Hey, Mom, I came by to get some clothes." At this time of night, "Derek, we need to talk about this morning's conversation, about bringing gloves." Chloe and I crouched behind the island holding our breath. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Sandra hanging up her coat. She looked different from the composed professional I'd met at family dinners. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes had a manic gleam that made my skin crawl. "Mom, about that," Derek said carefully. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with permanent solutions." Sandra's laugh was cold and sharp. "Derek, we're past the point of comfort. Bailey Crawford is a threat to everything we've built. She knows too much and she has too many resources to fight us legally. What if we just disappeared, left the state, started over somewhere else?" "With what money?" Sandra snapped. "Do you have any idea how much we've invested in this operation? The research, the surveillance, the planning. Bailey Crawford owes us $15 million, and we're going to collect it." "And if she won't cooperate?" Sandra's voice turned ice cold. "Then Bailey Crawford is going to have a very unfortunate accident. Just like Thomas Crawford, just like Amanda Foster, just like all the others who thought they could outsmart us." Hiding behind that kitchen island, listening to Sandra casually discuss murdering me, I finally understood the full scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just inheritance fraud. This was a systematic murder operation that had been claiming victims for years. And unless we escaped Sandra's house with the evidence we'd gathered, I was going to be the next victim. The sound of Sandra's footsteps moving toward the kitchen sent my heart rate into overdrive. Chloe and I pressed ourselves against the island, clutching the stolen documents and trying to stay silent. "Derek, you seem nervous," Sandra observed. "Is there something you want to tell me?" "No, Mom, just tired. It's been a stressful few days." "Indeed it has." Sandra's voice was getting closer to the kitchen. "Which is why we need to finalize our plans tonight. Bailey Crawford won't expect anything so soon after the failed legal approach." Derek cleared his throat. "What exactly are you planning?" "A home invasion gone wrong. Very tragic. Young woman alone in her grandfather's big house, surprised by burglars looking for valuables. These things happen all the time." Chloe grabbed my hand and squeezed it tightly. We both understood that Sandra was describing my murder in casual, matter-of-fact terms. "Mom, that seems extreme." "Extreme situations require extreme solutions, Derek. Bailey has already involved lawyers and journalists. If we don't act quickly, she'll expose our entire operation." "What about Derek's inheritance rights as her husband?" Derek asked, and I realized he was trying to stall while thinking of a way to get us out safely. Derek will be devastated by his young wife's tragic death, Sandra said with mock sympathy. As her widower, he'll inherit everything. The grieving process might take a year or two, but eventually he'll be ready to move forward with his life. Perhaps to another state where he might meet another young woman with family assets. The callousness of her planning made me feel sick. Sandra was discussing my death like it was a business transaction. "When were you thinking of doing this?" Derek asked. "Tonight. She'll be alone, probably still emotionally fragile from our confrontation. Jake has confirmed there are no patrol cars scheduled for her neighborhood after midnight. Tonight. Sandra was planning to kill me in less than 3 hours. Chloe was frantically texting on her phone, hopefully contacting Tom Rodriguez or the police. But even if help was coming, we needed to survive the next few minutes first. Derek, I need you to go to the basement and get the equipment we discussed," Sandra said. "What equipment?" "The cleaning supplies, the tools, the things we'll need to stage the scene properly." Sandra's voice was moving toward the kitchen again. "And Derek, make sure everything is clean and untraceable." Derek's footsteps headed toward the basement stairs, but instead of going down, I heard him coming toward the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway and motioned frantically for us to follow him. We crept through the dining room toward the back door carrying our evidence and praying Sandra wouldn't notice our movement. But just as we reached the door, Sandra called out from the living room. "Derek, did you hear something upstairs?" Derek froze. "No, Mom, just getting my things." "Check anyway, I thought I heard voices." Derek looked at us with panic in his eyes. We were trapped. If Sandra found us, she'd know Derek had betrayed her, and all 3 of us would become targets. That's when my phone vibrated with an incoming call. The ringtone was muffled by my pocket, but in the quiet house, it was clearly audible. "What was that?" Sandra called out sharply. "My phone," Derek said quickly. "Work call." But Sandra was already moving toward the kitchen. We had seconds before she discovered us. Derek made a split-second decision. "Mom," he called out loudly, "I think someone's trying to break in through the back door." Sandra's footsteps stopped. "What?" "I saw movement in the backyard. Someone's out there." It was a desperate gambit, but it worked. Sandra hurried toward the front of the house, probably to look out the front windows or call the police. Derek gestured urgently for us to leave through the back door. We slipped outside and ran toward our car, clutching the evidence against our chests. But as we reached the street, Sandra appeared at an upstairs window. Even in the dim light, I could see her face clearly, and I knew she'd seen us. "Drive," Chloe said tersely as we jumped into my car. "Drive fast." I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, checking my rearview mirror. Sandra was already coming out of her house, her phone pressed to her ear. "She's calling someone," I said. "Probably not the police," Chloe replied. "Derek, get in your car and follow us. We're going straight to the police station." Derek nodded and ran to his car. As I drove toward downtown, I could see Sandra's house receding in my mirror, but I didn't feel safe. People who had been planning murders for years wouldn't give up just because we'd escaped with some documents. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Don't answer it," Chloe said immediately. The phone stopped ringing, then started again. Same number. "Bailey," Chloe said urgently. "We need to assume Sandra has resources we don't know about. People who help her with the violent parts of her operation." As if to confirm her words, a black SUV pulled out of a side street behind us and began following at a steady distance. "Chloe, there's a car following us." "I see it. Keep driving toward downtown, but take a detour through the University District. Lots of lights, lots of people." I turned left toward the university, checking my mirrors. The black SUV followed. Derek's car was behind the SUV, trying to keep up. "Who do you think is in that SUV?" I asked. "Sandra's cleanup crew," Chloe said grimly. "The people who staged the home invasions and car accidents." My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Derek's number. "Bailey." Derek's voice was tight with fear. "That SUV tried to ram me off the road. I think they're trying to separate us." "Stay close," I said. "We're almost to the police station." But as we approached downtown, I realized the black SUV wasn't the only vehicle following us. A white van had joined the pursuit, and both vehicles were closing the distance. "Chloe, call 911. Tell them we're being chased by people attempting to commit murder." Chloe was already dialing. "This is Chloe Martinez. I'm a reporter with the Herald. We're being pursued by multiple vehicles." Yes, I said pursued. "We're carrying evidence of multiple murders. We're heading toward the downtown police station on 5th Street. The 911 dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. "Ma'am, how many vehicles are pursuing you?" "Two that we can see, a black SUV and a white van." "Are the occupants armed?" "We have to assume they are," Chloe replied. As we turned onto 5th Street, I could see the police station ahead, but the black SUV was accelerating, trying to cut us off before we reached safety. "They're not going to let us reach the police station," I said. That's when Derek's car suddenly accelerated past the SUV and pulled alongside our car. He gestured frantically toward a side street. "He wants us to turn," Chloe observed. "It could be another trap, or it could be our only chance to escape," Chloe said. "Derek knows this area better than we do." I made a split-second decision and followed Derek's car down the side street. The black SUV and white van followed, but the narrow residential street forced them to drop back to single file. Derek led us through a maze of side streets and alleys, finally pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner that was blazing with lights and full of customers. We all got out of our cars and ran toward the diner entrance carrying our evidence. The black SUV and white van drove slowly past the parking lot, but didn't stop, apparently unwilling to confront us in such a public place. Inside the diner, Derek collapsed into a booth and put his head in his hands. "This is insane. My mother is trying to kill all of us." "Derek," I said, sitting across from him, "we need to know everything. How many people work with Sandra? How do they usually kill their targets? What resources do they have?" Derek looked up at me with haunted eyes. "Bailey, I honestly don't know. Until tonight, I thought my mother was just good at researching inheritance opportunities. I never suspected she was actually murdering people." Chloe was on the phone with Tom Rodriguez, updating him on our situation. "Tom, we need police protection right now. Yes, we have evidence. Multiple murder charges. They tried to run us off the road. We're at Murphy's Diner on Elm Street." She hung up and looked at us. "Tom's contacting Detective Williams, the one he mentioned yesterday. They're sending patrol cars to pick us up and escort us to the station." "What about Sandra?" I asked. "If she realizes we have evidence against her, won't she try to disappear?" Derek shook his head. "Sandra won't run. She's invested too much time and money in this operation. She'll try to eliminate the threats first." Meaning us. Meaning us. Through the diner window, I could see the black SUV parked across the street. Whoever was inside was watching us, waiting for us to leave the safety of the public space. "Derek," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay. Do you actually love me, or was everything between us just part of the scam?" Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands on the table. "Bailey, when this started, it was just an assignment. My mother told me to get close to you, gain your trust, make you fall in love with me." My heart sank, even though I'd expected that answer. But Derek continued, "Somewhere along the way it became real for me. The person I was when I was with you, that was the person I wanted to be, not the person my mother raised me to be." "Then why didn't you stop it?" "Because I was weak. And because I didn't understand how dangerous my mother really was until it was too late." Derek looked at me with genuine anguish. "Bailey, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that everything I felt for you was real." Before I could respond, police sirens filled the air. Through the window, I could see patrol cars surrounding the diner, their red and blue lights flashing against the night sky. Detective Patricia Williams entered the diner and walked directly to our table. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of competent authority. "Miss Crawford, I'm Detective Williams. I understand you have evidence of multiple homicides. I looked at the manila envelope full of documents that had nearly gotten us killed. Detective, we have evidence that Sandra Martinez has been murdering people for their inheritances, and she was planning to kill me tonight. Detective Williams sat down across from me. Then I think it's time we had a very long conversation. Detective Williams spread our evidence across 2 tables in the diner's back section, which the manager had cordoned off for privacy. The documents looked even more damning under the harsh fluorescent lighting. This is quite an operation, Detective Williams said, examining the maps and surveillance photos. Miss Crawford, how long have you suspected Mrs. Martinez of criminal activity? 3 days, I admitted. Before Monday morning, I thought she was just an overprotective mother-in-law. Detective Williams looked at Derek, who was slumped in his chair like a man facing execution. Mr. Martinez, I need to understand your level of involvement in this conspiracy. I helped target the victims, Derek said quietly. I researched their backgrounds, approached them romantically, gained their trust. But I never knew my mother was murdering people. I thought we were just, manipulating them into sharing their assets willingly. How many victims are we talking about? Derek gestured toward the thick folders Chloe had photographed. At least 25 women over the past 6 years, maybe more. Detective Williams whistled softly. This is the largest serial murder case I've encountered. Mr. Martinez, I'm going to need you to provide detailed information about every victim you helped target. I'll tell you everything I know, Derek promised. But detective, my mother isn't working alone. She has people who help with surveillance document forgery and... He paused, struggling with the words. And the actual murders... Derek nodded miserably. Detective Williams turned to Chloe. Ms. Martinez, you mentioned that Mrs. Martinez's house contains additional evidence. We'll need search warrants, but that will take time. Detective, I said urgently. Sandra thinks I'm alone and vulnerable tonight. She was planning to stage a home invasion at my house. What if we use that against her? What are you suggesting? Let her think her plan is working. Let her come to my house with her accomplices and arrest them in the act. Detective Williams shook her head immediately. Absolutely not. Miss Crawford, you're not a trained law enforcement officer. Using you as bait is too dangerous. But it might be the only way to catch them before they disappear, I argued. Sandra knows we have evidence now. If we don't move fast, she'll destroy whatever's left and flee the state. Derek leaned forward. Detective Bailey's right. My mother has contingency plans for situations like this. By tomorrow morning, she'll be gone and you'll never find her. What kind of contingency plans? New identities, offshore bank accounts, safe houses in other states. Sandra has been planning for the possibility of exposure since she started this operation. Detective Williams considered this information. Even if I agreed to such a plan, which I haven't, how would we make Mrs. Martinez believe Miss Crawford was alone and unprotected? Chloe spoke up. We fake a fight. Derek goes back to Sandra, tells her he couldn't find us, that we must have gone to the police. Sandra assumes her plan is blown and starts making escape preparations. But then Derek calls her later. I continued, tells her the police didn't believe us, that I'm home alone and scared. Sandra thinks she has one last chance to eliminate the threat before running. Derek was nodding slowly. That could work. Sandra's ego would make her want to finish the job personally. She spent too much time planning this to let it go. Detective Williams looked skeptical. There are too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. Detective Chloe said, what's the alternative? Even with the evidence we have proving that Sandra murdered specific people, will take months of investigation. Meanwhile, she disappears and starts over somewhere else. And more women die, I added. Detective Sandra has killed at least 25 people. How many more will die while we're building a court case? Detective Williams was quiet for several minutes, studying the evidence and considering our proposal. Finally, she looked at Derek. Mr. Martinez, if we proceed with this plan, you'll be wearing a wire. Everything your mother says will be recorded and admissible in court. I understand. And if you're lying to us, if this is all an elaborate setup to help your mother escape, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison." Derek met her eyes steadily. "Detective, my mother has destroyed my life and the lives of dozens of innocent women. I want to see her stopped more than anyone." Detective Williams made her decision. "All right, here's what we're going to do." For the next 2 hours, we planned what Detective Williams called controlled bait operation. The plan was complex but logical. Derek would return to Sandra, claiming he'd lost track of Chloe and me after we fled her house. He'd tell Sandra that we'd gone to the police but hadn't been believed because our evidence was stolen and therefore inadmissible. Meanwhile, I would return to my house under heavy but concealed police surveillance. Chloe would publicly leave the area, making it appear that I was alone and abandoned by my allies. Then Derek would contact Sandra with inside information that I was home alone, scared and vulnerable. Sandra would presumably move forward with her murder plan, walking directly into a police trap. "The key," Detective Williams explained, "is making Sandra believe she's in control of the situation. Her ego and her investment in this operation will make her take risks she might not normally take." Derek was fitted with sophisticated recording equipment disguised as a watch and shirt buttons. Chloe and I were given police escorts to my house, where Detective Williams showed me the surveillance positions her officers would take. "Miss Crawford, I want to be very clear about something," Detective Williams said as we stood in my living room. "If at any point you feel unsafe, if anything seems wrong, you signal us immediately. Do not try to be heroic. We have enough evidence to arrest Mrs. Martinez for multiple felonies. We don't need to risk your life to add attempted murder to the charges." I nodded, but privately I was determined to see this through. Sandra Martinez had murdered my grandfather and destroyed countless other lives. I wanted to look her in the eyes when she realized her reign of terror was over. At midnight, Derek texted me, "She's coming, 20 minutes. I positioned myself in my living room, lights on, curtains open, appearing to be alone and unaware of any danger. Through my window, I could see the shadows where police officers were concealed. At 12:23, Sandra's car pulled into my driveway. But she wasn't alone. 3 other vehicles followed her, parking on my street with their lights off. Detective Williams' voice came through my earpiece. "Miss Crawford, we count 7 individuals approaching your house. More than we anticipated. Be ready to take cover if necessary." My heart was pounding as I watched Sandra approach my front door with 2 men I didn't recognize. They were carrying what looked like tools and cleaning supplies, just as Sandra had mentioned to Derek. The doorbell rang. I approached the door slowly, knowing that everything Sandra said and did from this point forward was being recorded by multiple surveillance devices. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to sound scared and unsure. "Bailey, it's Sandra, Derek's mother. I know you're frightened, dear, but we need to talk." I opened the door and Sandra smiled at me with the same warm expression she'd worn at family dinners. But now I could see the coldness behind her eyes, the calculating predator beneath the motherly facade. "Hello, Sandra," I said. "What brings you by so late?" "I think you know Bailey," Sandra replied, stepping into my foyer uninvited. "I think it's time we finished our conversation from Monday morning." The 2 men followed her inside, and I noticed they were both wearing gloves. Sandra closed the door behind them and turned to me with a smile that made my blood run cold. Sandra's smile widened as she gestured for her companions to spread out through my living room. The taller man, who had graying hair and wore a mechanic's coveralls, positioned himself near the back door. The shorter one, younger with nervous eyes, stayed close to Sandra like a bodyguard. "You know Bailey," Sandra said conversationally, settling herself on my couch as if she were here for afternoon tea. "I've been thinking about our little misunderstanding on Monday. I realize now that we approached the situation incorrectly." "Oh," I kept my voice steady, remembering Detective Williams' instructions to let Sandra talk as much as possible. "Yes, we were treating this like a business negotiation, when really it's much simpler than that." Sandra's voice remained pleasant, but her eyes were cold as winter. "You have something that belongs to my family. We're here to collect it." The man in coveralls was examining my windows, checking locks and sight lines. professional behavior that made my skin crawl. Sandra, I don't understand what you think belongs to your family. Don't be coy, dear. Your grandfather's company represents years of Derek's emotional investment. Do you have any idea how much time and energy my son put into making you fall in love with him? The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to respond calmly. I thought Derek loved me. Derek is a very good actor, Sandra replied. I trained him well, just like I trained his cousins and his uncle. We're quite the talented family when it comes to winning hearts and accessing bank accounts. Through my earpiece, I heard Detective Williams whisper, "She's admitting to running a family conspiracy. Keep her talking." How many other women have you targeted? I asked. Sandra laughed a sound like breaking glass. Oh, Bailey, you really have no idea how extensive our operation is. Do you... She gestured to the younger man who pulled out a tablet computer and began showing me photographs. I recognized some of the faces from the folders we'd stolen from Sandra's house, but there were many more. 37 successful acquisitions over the past 8 years, Sandra said proudly. Total value approximately $43 million. Your little inheritance would have been our biggest single score. What happened to all those women? Most of them cooperated eventually. Asset transfers, joint accounts, business partnerships. Really quite civilized. Sandra's tone remained conversational. Of course, some of them were more stubborn. Like Amanda Foster. Sandra's expression didn't change, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. Amanda was unfortunate. She thought she could outsmart us by hiring private investigators. Poor dear had a terrible accident before she could share her findings with anyone. My blood ran cold. Sandra was casually admitting to murder, apparently confident that I wouldn't survive to repeat her words. And my grandfather... Thomas was a lovely man, but quite protective of his assets. We tried the subtle approach first, of course. Derek spent months cultivating your relationship, waiting for the natural opportunity to access your inheritance. Sandra stood up and began pacing around my living room like she owned it. But Thomas started asking questions about Derek's background. He was suspicious, wanted to hire investigators of his own. We couldn't allow that. So you killed him. We helped Thomas along to his natural destination, Sandra corrected with mock sensitivity. The experimental cardiac medication simply accelerated a process that would have happened anyway given his age and health conditions. Through my earpiece, Detective Williams said grimly, "We have her confession to multiple murders. Signal us when you're ready to end this." But Sandra wasn't finished talking. She seemed to be enjoying herself, finally able to share the scope of her accomplishments with someone who could appreciate them. You know, Bailey, what we've built here is really quite remarkable. A multi-generational, multi-state inheritance recovery operation. My late husband started it 20 years ago, targeting elderly widows in Nevada. When he died, I expanded the business model. Business model, I repeated numbly. Absolutely. We identify recent inheritances through public records research. The beneficiaries for emotional vulnerabilities deploy appropriate family members to establish romantic relationships and facilitate asset transfers through legal or extra-legal means. The man in coveralls finished his inspection and nodded to Sandra. House is secure. No immediate neighbors visible. Excellent. Sandra turned back to me with renewed focus. Now then, Bailey, let's discuss your options. My options? You can sign over controlling interest in Dataflow Solutions to Derek effective immediately. We have the paperwork ready along with a proper notary this time. The younger man pulled legal documents from a briefcase I hadn't noticed before. These weren't the crude forgeries from Monday morning. They looked professionally prepared. And if I refuse... Sandra's smile turned predatory. Then I'm afraid you'll be the victim of a tragic home invasion. Young widow living alone in her deceased grandfather's house, surprised by burglars looking for valuables. These things happen all the time. People will suspect Derek. Derek will be devastated, of course. He'll inherit everything as your loving husband, but he'll be too grief-stricken to make any major financial decisions for quite some time. Eventually, he'll recover and perhaps relocate to start fresh somewhere new. The casual way she discussed my murder made it clear this wasn't Sandra's first time delivering this speech. How many other women had sat in their living rooms listening to Sandra explain how their deaths would be staged? What if I scream? What if the neighbors hear, "Bailey, dear, it's nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. Your nearest neighbor is 200 feet away with their bedroom on the opposite side of their house. And Frank here," she gestured to the man in coveralls, "is very good at keeping things quiet." Frank smiled, and I noticed he was missing several teeth. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel. "Won't hurt a bit if you cooperate, lady. Quick and clean." "How many people have you killed, Frank?" Frank looked to Sandra for permission to answer. She nodded. "Counting tonight. This'll be number 14 for me personally. But the family's got other specialists for different situations." "The family?" Sandra beamed with pride. "Oh yes, Bailey. This is very much a family business. Derek has 3 male cousins who handle romantic targeting. His sister Emma specializes in befriending elderly women. His uncle manages our financial operations from Arizona. Quite the enterprise." My mind reeled at the scope of what Sandra was describing. This wasn't just a small-time fraud operation. This was organized crime spanning multiple states and involving dozens of family members. "We even have connections in law enforcement," Sandra continued. "Derek's cousin Jake works for the county coroner's office, which helps us understand investigation procedures. His other cousin Maria works for the DMV, useful for identity verification and tracking targets' movements." Through my earpiece, Detective Williams' voice was tight with urgency. "Bailey, she's describing a massive criminal network. We need to let other agencies know about this immediately." Sandra checked her watch. "Well, this has been lovely, but we do need to conclude our business. Bailey, are you going to sign the documents, or shall we proceed with the alternative plan?" "What if I sign but then challenge the transfer later?" "Dear, you won't be in a position to challenge anything. These documents include a clause stating that you're transferring the assets due to terminal illness. Very sad. After your tragic death tonight, Derek will simply be executing your final wishes." The level of planning and forethought was staggering. Sandra had considered every possible angle, every potential complication. "How long have you been planning this specific operation?" "Since Thomas Crawford filed his will 3 years ago. Public records, Bailey. Your grandfather's death was always going to make someone very wealthy. We simply ensured it would be us." That's when I heard something that made my heart skip the faint sound of car doors closing outside. Multiple car doors. Sandra heard it too. Her expression immediately shifted from confident to alert. "Frank, check the street," she ordered. Frank moved to the window and peered through the curtains. His face went pale. "Boss, we got company. Multiple vehicles, looks like law enforcement." Sandra's composure cracked for the first time. "That's impossible. Derek said the police didn't believe her story." "Derek lied," I said quietly. Sandra spun to face me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You little bitch! You've been recording this whole time!" Every word I confirmed. Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like a small pistol. "Frank, Joey, we're leaving. Now." "What about her?" Frank asked, gesturing toward me. "Leave her. We'll deal with Bailey Crawford later." But as Sandra moved toward my back door, Detective Williams' voice boomed from outside. "This is the police. The house is surrounded. Exit through the front door with your hands visible." Sandra looked around my living room like a trapped animal. Then her gaze settled on me with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've done, Bailey. You think this ends with my arrest. We have family from California to Florida. Someone will finish what I started." "Maybe," I said, "but it won't be you." That's when my front door burst open and armed officers flooded into my living room, shouting commands and pointing weapons at Sandra and her accomplices. "Sandra Martinez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder wire fraud, racketeering, and multiple counts of homicide." As Detective Williams read Sandra her rights, I finally allowed myself to breathe. But Sandra's words echoed in my mind, "Someone will finish what I started." This wasn't over. It was just the end of the first chapter. The arrest scene in my living room was controlled chaos. Frank and Joey surrendered immediately, clearly recognizing the futility of resistance when faced with 8 armed officers. But Sandra Martinez wasn't going quietly. "This is harassment," Sandra declared as Detective Williams approached her with handcuffs. "I came here to have a private conversation with my daughter-in-law." "Mrs. Martinez, we have recordings of you confessing to multiple murders," Detective Williams replied calmly. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Sandra's eyes blazed with fury as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You recorded a private conversation without my consent. That's illegal wiretapping." "Actually," Detective Williams said, "Miss Crawford consented to recording conversations in her own home. Your participation was voluntary." As the officers led Sandra toward the front door, she turned back to me one final time. "Bailey, you have no idea what you've just set in motion. My family doesn't forgive, and they don't forget." The threat sent chills down my spine, but before I could respond, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Through my front window, I could see multiple vehicles racing down my street with no headlights. "We've got incoming," one of the officers called out urgently. Detective Williams immediately pulled me away from the windows. "Everyone down, these could be reinforcements." The vehicles screeched to a halt in front of my house and armed figures poured out. But instead of attacking, they immediately took defensive positions behind their cars. "Federal agents," someone shouted from outside. "FBI." Detective Williams looked confused. "I didn't call for federal backup." A woman's voice came through a megaphone. "This is Agent Patricia Torres, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with Detective Williams immediately." Detective Williams cautiously approached my front door. "Agent Torres, what's FBI doing at a local murder scene?" "Detective, we've been tracking Sandra Martinez and her family for 2 years as part of a multi-state racketeering investigation. Your caller tonight just became a federal case." 20 minutes later, my living room had been transformed into a federal command center. Agent Torres, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, spread files across my coffee table, while her team set up communication equipment. "Miss Crawford." Agent Torres began. "You've stumbled into the middle of the largest inheritance fraud ring we've ever encountered. The Martinez family has been operating across 7 states with connections to organized crime families in 3 major cities." I stared at the FBI files, recognizing some of the victim photographs, but seeing many I'd never encountered. "How many victims are we talking about?" "Confirmed 63 women over the past 12 years. Estimated total theft $87 million. Confirmed murders, 21 victims." The numbers were staggering. What I'd thought was a local criminal operation was actually a massive conspiracy, spanning multiple states and involving dozens of conspirators. Agent Torres, Detective Williams, said, "How long has the Bureau been investigating this family?" "Since 2022, when financial irregularities flagged unusual inheritance transfer patterns in Nevada. We've been building a RICO case, but Sandra Martinez has been careful to keep her hands clean of direct evidence." Agent Torres opened another file. "Until tonight. Miss Crawford, the recordings you helped us obtain contain direct confessions to multiple felonies. Sandra Martinez just handed us everything we need to dismantle their entire operation." "What about the threats she made?" I asked. "About family members finishing what she started?" Agent Torres' expression grew serious. "That's why we're here. The Martinez family has approximately 40 known associates across multiple states. Now that Sandra's been arrested, they'll either scatter to avoid prosecution or come after me for revenge," I finished. "Exactly. Miss Crawford, we're going to need your cooperation in a federal witness protection program while we round up the rest of the organization." My head was spinning. Witness protection? For how long? Could be months. Could be longer. This is a complex operation that's going to take time to fully unravel. Detective Williams cleared her throat. "Agent Torres, what about Derek Martinez? He's currently cooperating with our investigation." Derek Martinez is in federal custody as of 20 minutes ago, Agent Torres replied. We arrested him when he left Sandra's house to return home. He's looking at serious federal charges, but his cooperation tonight may help with plea negotiations. The reality was sinking in. My marriage was definitely over. My normal life was indefinitely suspended, and I was now a federal witness in a massive organized crime case. Agent Torres. I said, there's something else you should know. Sandra mentioned that Derek has cousins working in law enforcement and government offices. Jake at the coroner's office, Maria at the DMV. How deep does this corruption go? Agent Torres exchanged glances with her team members. That's what we're trying to determine. We suspect the Martinez family has been placing relatives in strategic positions throughout the region, giving them access to confidential records and advance warning of investigations. Which means they might know about tonight's arrests already, Detective Williams observed. Precisely. Miss Crawford, I need you to pack a bag. We're relocating you to a secure location tonight. As I gathered essential belongings from my bedroom, I could hear Agent Torres coordinating with teams across multiple states. The scope of the operation was breathtaking. Simultaneous raids were being conducted in California, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. When I returned to my living room, Agent Torres was on the phone with what sounded like the U.S. Attorney's Office. Yes, we have the primary witness secured. Multiple confessions recorded. RICO charges are definitely supported by the evidence. No, she's not injured, just shaken up. She hung up and turned to me. Miss Crawford, I want you to understand the significance of what happened here tonight. Your courage in cooperating with this investigation has potentially saved dozens of lives and helped us break up one of the most sophisticated inheritance fraud rings in U.S. history. I just wanted to protect my grandfather's company, I said quietly. You've done much more than that. You've given justice to 21 murder victims and prevented countless future crimes. As we prepared to leave my house, I took one last look around the home where I'd thought I was building a happy marriage. Instead, I'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of families. Agent Torres, will I ever be able to come back here? Yes, Miss Crawford. Once we've arrested the key family members and dismantled their network, you'll be able to return to your normal life. Your grandfather's company will be waiting for you. As we walked to the federal vehicles, I realized that Sandra Martinez had been wrong about one crucial thing. She told Derek that Hearts don't pay bills, but Data Flow Solutions was worth $15 million, precisely because my grandfather had built it with integrity and love. Sandra's operation was built on greed and violence, which made it powerful but also fragile. Once exposed, it would collapse quickly. My grandfather's legacy, built on trust and genuine relationships, would endure long after Sandra Martinez was forgotten in a federal prison cell. The federal safe house was a modest ranch-style home in suburban Sacramento, unremarkable except for the sophisticated security system and the 2 agents who took shifts monitoring the perimeter. For the first week, I felt like I was living in a movie, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at unexpected sounds. Agent Torres visited daily with updates on the investigation. The scope of arrests was staggering. We've taken 37 family members and associates into custody across 6 states. She reported on Thursday morning. The cooperation has been remarkable. Once people realize Sandra was recording their conversations for insurance purposes, they're very eager to make deals. Sandra was recording her own accomplices extensively. We found hundreds of hours of audio and video files in her house documenting everything from murder planning to money laundering operations. Sandra Martinez kept records like a corporate accountant. I shook my head in amazement. She was so paranoid about evidence against her that she created evidence against everyone else. Exactly. And Derek has been invaluable in interpreting the family's operational procedures. He's providing details about cases going back 8 years. How is Derek? I asked, surprised to find I still cared about his well-being despite everything. Agent Torres' expression softened slightly. Honestly devastated. I think Derek genuinely believed he was just helping with business negotiations. Learning about the murders has been traumatic for him. Will he go to prison? Probably. But with his cooperation, he's looking at maybe 3 to 5 years instead of life without parole. The prosecutor is recommending minimum security, given that he was essentially raised and groomed for this criminal lifestyle. That afternoon, Agent Torres brought news that made my heart race with excitement and fear. Miss Crawford, we found Thomas Crawford's medical records in Sandra's files, the ones documenting how she murdered him. I had been expecting this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a physical blow. Can you prove it? Absolutely. Sandra kept detailed notes about the experimental drug protocol, including video recordings of her administering the medication to your grandfather. Video recordings. Sandra filmed herself giving your grandfather what he thought were legitimate cardiac medications. She was apparently documenting the process for future reference. The videos show clear premeditation and deliberate murder. I closed my eyes, trying to process the horror of Sandra coldly documenting my grandfather's murder, like it was a science experiment. There's more. Agent Torres continued gently. We also have evidence that Sandra burglarized your grandfather's house after his death, looking for additional financial information. She was planning this operation for months before his actual death. What kind of evidence? Agent Torres pulled out a tablet and showed me security footage from a house across the street from my grandfather's home. The timestamp showed Sandra entering and leaving the house 2 days after the funeral, carrying what appeared to be boxes of documents. Your grandfather's neighbor had a security camera that captured the break-in. We never would have found this footage without Derek's information about Sandra's operational timeline. The evidence against Sandra was overwhelming, but Agent Torres explained that building cases against the entire family network would take months. The good news, she said, is that with Sandra and her key lieutenants in custody, the immediate threat to you has decreased significantly. Most of the extended family members are more interested in plea bargains than revenge. Most of them. Derek's uncle Miguel is still at large. He managed the family's operations in Arizona and New Mexico, and he has connections to some dangerous people. We're treating him as the primary ongoing threat. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Tom Rodriguez, my estate attorney, had driven up from the city with documents requiring my signature. Bailey, I have some extraordinary news about data flow solutions, Tom said as we sat in the safe house living room under Agent Torres's watchful supervision. Good news or bad news? Remarkably good news. The publicity from the federal investigation has brought data flow to the attention of several major technology companies. 3 separate firms have approached me about acquisition offers. I stared at him. Acquisition offers? The highest bid is $37 million. Apparently, your grandfather's data management systems are exactly what several Fortune 500 companies need for compliance with new federal privacy regulations. My inheritance had more than doubled in value while I was hiding from murderers. The irony was almost laughable. Tom, I don't understand how positive publicity could come from being associated with a murder investigation. Because the media coverage has focused on your courage in exposing the criminal conspiracy, not on your grandfather's death. Data Flow Solutions is being portrayed as a company with such integrity that criminals would kill to steal it. Agent Torres leaned forward with interest. Miss Crawford, that kind of positive media attention also provides you with additional protection. Miguel Martinez would have a much harder time targeting someone who's currently featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Tom pulled out a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Tech Heiress Helps FBI Break Multi-State Murder Ring." The article described Data Flow Solutions as a company built on the ethical principles that criminal conspirators found impossible to corrupt. There's more, Tom continued. The state of California is considering legislation named after your grandfather requiring enhanced disclosure protocols for inheritance-related business transfers. Thomas Crawford's name is going to be associated with ethical business practices for decades. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like peace. Grandpa Thomas's legacy wasn't just surviving Sandra's attack, it was being strengthened by it. Tom, what do you think I should do about the acquisition offers? That's entirely your decision. But Bailey, $37 million would give you financial security for life, plus the resources to pursue whatever goals matter most to you. I thought about the victims of Sandra's conspiracy, the women whose lives had been destroyed by greed and violence. What if I used some of that money to help the other victims? Rebecca Chen lost her restaurants. Christine Walsh lost her antique shop. Maybe I could help them rebuild. Agent Torres smiled. Miss Crawford, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to make Miguel Martinez's job very difficult. You're becoming a public symbol of justice and integrity. Attacking you now would be like attacking a national hero. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bedroom of the safe house, I realized that Sandra Martinez had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of real wealth. She'd thought $15 million was the prize, but the actual treasure was the integrity and courage that wealth represented. My grandfather hadn't just left me money, he'd left me the wisdom to recognize true love from manipulation, the strength to fight injustice, and the resources to help others do the same. Sandra's criminal empire was built on exploitation and fear. It was powerful but brittle, impressive but temporary. The foundation my grandfather had given me was built on love and principle. It would last forever, no matter how much money was involved. 2 weeks later, Agent Torres arrived at the safe house with the news I'd been hoping for. Miguel Martinez was arrested this morning in Phoenix. Drug trafficking charges, weapons violations, and about 15 counts of federal racketeering. He's not going to be bothering anyone for a very long time. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Does this mean I can go home? It means the immediate danger is over. But Bailey, I want you to consider staying in protective custody for another few weeks while we finalize the prosecution cases. Your testimony is going to be crucial in ensuring these people never see freedom again. Of course, whatever you need. That afternoon, Tom Rodriguez returned with even more extraordinary news. Bailey, the acquisition offers have increased. Dataflow Solutions is now valued at $42 million, and 3 companies are engaged in a bidding war. Why do they want it so badly? Because your grandfather's systems are apparently 20 years ahead of current industry standards. The privacy protection protocols he developed are exactly what companies need to comply with evolving federal regulations. Tom spread financial documents across the safe house dining table. But there's another option you should consider. Instead of selling Dataflow, what if you expanded it? How? The companies that want to acquire Dataflow are also interested in licensing your grandfather's technology. We could structure deals that would generate ongoing revenue while keeping you in control of the company. The numbers were staggering. Licensing agreements with 3 major corporations would generate approximately $8 million annually in recurring revenue, while maintaining my ownership of the core technology. Tom, I don't know anything about running a technology company. But you know about integrity, which is what your grandfather built Dataflow on, and you'd be hiring experienced executives to handle the technical operations. Agent Torres had been listening to our conversation with growing excitement. Miss Crawford, this could be perfect timing. Taking control of a rapidly expanding company would give you a very public, very legitimate reason to be constantly surrounded by security and legal professionals. You mean it would protect me from future threats? Exactly. CEO of a $42 million technology company gets a lot more security than somebody hiding in witness protection. Over the next few days, I worked with Tom to structure a plan for Dataflow's expansion. Instead of selling my grandfather's life work, I would honor it by growing it into something even more significant. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Dataflow would license its core technology to major corporations while developing new privacy protection systems for small businesses. The company would also establish a foundation providing free data security services to nonprofit organizations. Your grandfather would be proud, Tom said as we finalized the business structure. You're taking his ethical vision and scaling it to help thousands of organizations. The morning I was scheduled to leave the safe house, Agent Torres provided a final briefing on the Martinez family prosecutions. Sandra Martinez pled guilty to 21 counts of murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Life in prison without possibility of parole. What about Derek? 3 years minimum security. He'll be eligible for work release after 18 months if he continues cooperating with investigations into similar operations in other states. Agent Torres paused. Bailey Derek asked me to give you a message. What message? He said to tell you that loving you was the only real thing in his life, and that he's grateful you helped him find the courage to do the right thing. I felt a stab of sadness for what Derek and I might have been if we'd met under different circumstances, but I also felt grateful that our relationship, however fraudulent its beginning, had ultimately led to justice for so many victims. When I finally returned to my house, it felt like coming back to a different world. The place where Sandra Martinez had threatened my life was now the headquarters of a rapidly expanding technology company. Dataflow Solutions had hired 12 employees in my absence, including a brilliant young chief technology officer named Sarah Kim, who'd graduated from Stanford with expertise in privacy protection systems. Miss Crawford. Sarah said during my first day back, "Your grandfather's work is absolutely revolutionary. We're fielding calls from companies across the country who want to implement his data security protocols." My home office, where Sandra had spread her fraudulent documents just a month earlier, was now a conference room where we planned legitimate business expansion that would help thousands of companies protect their customers' privacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sandra had tried to steal my grandfather's legacy through violence and fraud. Instead, her crimes had brought that legacy to national attention and created opportunities for growth beyond anything Grandpa Thomas had imagined. That evening, I sat in the same kitchen where Sandra had threatened me with fake notary documents, but now the counter was covered with real legal agreements worth tens of millions of dollars, all designed to honor my grandfather's vision of ethical technology. Chloe joined me for dinner, bringing wine and updates on her investigative reporting. Bailey the Herald is nominating my series on the Martinez family for a Pulitzer Prize. 25,000 words documenting the entire conspiracy, from Thomas Crawford's murder through Miguel Martinez's arrest. That's incredible, Chloe. You deserve every award they give you. I couldn't have done it without your courage, Chloe replied. But Bailey, there's something else. Several other newspapers want to interview you about starting over after surviving organized crime targeting. I considered this. What kind of interviews? The kind where you talk about how surviving betrayal and violence led you to build something positive. Your story could help other women who've been targeted by similar schemes. Looking around my kitchen, I realized that Dataflow Solutions had become much more than a profitable business. It had become a symbol of how ethical principles could triumph over criminal greed, how love and integrity could overcome violence and manipulation. Chloe, I said, let's do those interviews. If my story can help other women recognize and escape from predatory relationships, then everything that happened with Sandra and Derek will have served a purpose. As we planned my media appearances, I felt my grandfather's presence more strongly than I had since his death. He'd given me the tools to recognize true love from manipulation, the courage to fight injustice, and the wisdom to build something lasting from tragedy. Dataflow Solutions was no longer just Thomas Crawford's legacy. It was becoming Bailey Crawford's contribution to a world where technology served justice instead of greed. 6 months after Sandra's arrest, I was standing in the Dataflow Solutions headquarters, a gleaming office building we'd leased in downtown Sacramento. The company now employed 47 people and had contracts with major corporations across 3 continents. Miss Crawford, Sarah Kim, said approaching my office with a stack of patent applications. The European Union wants to implement our privacy protocols as the standard for all member nations. I shook my head in amazement. Grandpa Thomas always said his systems were ahead of their time. I don't think even he imagined they'd become international standards. As I reviewed the patent documents, my assistant knocked on the office door. "Bailey, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's personal." Through my office window, I could see a man in the lobby who looked familiar. When I realized who it was, my heart started racing. Derek Martinez stood near the reception desk wearing a simple gray suit and looking nervous. He was thinner than I remembered, and his face showed the strain of everything that had happened. "Should I call security?" my assistant asked. "No," I said after a moment's consideration. "Send him to conference room B. I'll meet him there in 5 minutes." As I walked toward the conference room, I tried to process the mix of emotions Derek's appearance had triggered: anger, sadness, curiosity, and something that might have been relief that he was alive and apparently well. Derek stood when I entered the room, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. "Bailey," he said quietly, "thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would." "Derek," I kept my voice neutral and stayed near the door. "I thought you were in federal prison." "Work release program. I've been living in a halfway house in San Francisco working for a nonprofit that helps fraud victims navigate financial recovery." The irony was striking. Derek was now helping the same type of people his family had victimized. "How did you know where to find me?" "Your business success has been in all the papers," Derek said with a slight smile. "Dataflow Solutions, the integrity-driven technology company that's revolutionizing data privacy. I'm proud of what you've built." "Derek, why are you here?" Derek sat down and gestured for me to join him, but I remained standing. "I wanted to apologize, not just for what my family did to you, but for what I did. I wanted to tell you that every day since my arrest, I've regretted not being strong enough to stop my mother before she hurt so many people." "You were raised in that environment," I said. "I understand that you didn't choose it. But I chose to go along with it when I was old enough to know better." Derek's voice was heavy with genuine remorse. "Bailey, I participated in targeting women whose only crime was inheriting money from people they loved. I helped destroy lives." "You also helped stop it," I pointed out. "Your testimony put your entire family in prison and saved other women from becoming victims." Derek nodded sadly. "The counselors at the facility say that's important for my rehabilitation, but it doesn't change the fact that I spent months lying to you, manipulating your emotions, planning to steal your inheritance." We sat in silence for several moments. Through the conference room windows, I could see my employees working on projects that would help protect millions of people's private information. "Derek," I said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Anything." "When you said you loved me, was any of that real?" Derek's composure cracked slightly. "Bailey, that's the question that's been tearing me apart for months. When this started, it was absolutely an assignment. My mother trained me to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities in wealthy women." He paused, struggling with the words. "But somewhere along the way, pretending to love you became the most honest thing I'd ever done. The person I was when I was with you was the person I wanted to be, not the person my family had made me." "That doesn't answer my question." Derek met my eyes directly. "Yes, Bailey, I loved you. I still love you, which makes what I did even more unforgivable." Before I could respond, there was a knock on the conference room door. Agent Torres entered, her expression professional but concerned. "Miss Crawford, I hope I'm not interrupting, but when we saw Derek Martinez enter the building, we wanted to make sure everything was all right." "Agent Torres," Derek said, standing immediately. "I have permission to be here. I filed the proper notifications with my case officer." "I know, Mr. Martinez. We've been tracking your movements as part of your work release conditions." Agent Torres looked at me. "Bailey, I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with this meeting." "I'm fine," I said. "Derek, you should know that Agent Torres has become a friend over the past few months." Derek nodded. Agent Torres, I want you to know that I'm not here to ask Bailey for anything. I just wanted to apologize and tell her that I'm proud of what she's accomplished. Agent Torres studied Derek's expression carefully. Mr. Martinez, your rehabilitation progress has been exemplary. Your work with fraud victims has helped dozens of families recover assets they thought were lost forever. It's the least I can do, Derek replied. Agent Torres turned to me. Bailey, there's something else Derek should know. We've been keeping an eye on him not just because of his work release conditions, but because we've been considering offering him a position with the Bureau. My eyebrows shot up in surprise. Derek looked equally stunned. Agent Torres, Derek said slowly, I don't understand. Derek, your understanding of inheritance fraud operations is unparalleled. Your family's methodology was so sophisticated that we believe similar operations are active in other parts of the country. We need someone who understands how these criminals think and operate. Derek stared at her. You want me to become an FBI agent? We want you to become a consultant who helps us identify and stop inheritance fraud rings before they claim more victims. The work would be similar to what you're doing now, but with federal resources and authority. I found myself speaking before I'd consciously decided to. Derek, that's incredible. You could help prevent other families from going through what my grandfather and I experienced. Derek looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Bailey, would you be comfortable with me working in law enforcement? Given our history, I thought about it carefully. Derek, what your family did was terrible, but your cooperation helped bring them to justice and save other women's lives. If you can continue that work and help more people, then something good will have come from all the pain they caused. Agent Torres smiled. Mr. Martinez, if you're interested, we can discuss the details after your work release period ends. The position would require additional background investigations and psychological evaluations, but your rehabilitation counselors speak very highly of your progress. After Agent Torres left, Derek and I sat alone in the conference room for several more minutes. Bailey. Derek said finally, I know there's no possibility of us ever. I know I destroyed any chance we had for a future together. Derek, I said gently, we never really had a future together. Our entire relationship was built on deception and manipulation, even if your feelings eventually became genuine. I know, but I want you to know that meeting you changed my life in ways that have nothing to do with the criminal investigation. You showed me what it felt like to want to be worthy of someone's love. And now I'm trying to become the man you thought you were marrying. Someone who protects people instead of exploiting them. Someone who builds things up instead of tearing them down. As Derek prepared to leave, I realized that our conversation had given me something I hadn't expected closure. Derek, I said as he reached the door, I hope you take the FBI position. I think you could help a lot of people. Thank you, Bailey, and congratulations on everything you've built here. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud. After Derek left, I returned to my office and looked out at the bustling Data Flow Solutions workspace. My employees were young and old men and women representing dozens of different backgrounds and ethnicities. What they had in common was a commitment to using technology to protect people's privacy and security. My grandfather had built Dataflow on the principle that technology should serve humanity, not exploit it. Sandra Martinez had tried to pervert that principle for criminal gain, but Derek's transformation from predator to protector represented something hopeful. The possibility that people could change, that damage could be repaired, that justice could triumph over greed. That evening, as I reviewed contracts that would bring Dataflow's privacy protection services to nonprofit organizations around the world, I realized that my grandfather's vision had evolved into something even more powerful than he'd imagined. We weren't just protecting data. We were protecting the kind of trust and intimacy that Sandra Martinez's family had tried to destroy. Love It turned out really could pay the bills. 2 years after Sandra Martinez's arrest, I stood at the altar of a small church in Napa Valley, wearing my grandmother's pearls and a dress I'd chosen myself this time. The man waiting for me at the front of the church wasn't someone I'd met in a coffee shop or through a chance encounter. He was someone who had seen me at my most vulnerable and had chosen to protect rather than exploit. Agent Michael Torres, Patricia Torres' partner in the FBI Financial Crimes Division, had been part of the team that saved my life that night in my living room. Over the months of depositions, trials, and testimony, our professional relationship had slowly evolved into something deeper. "I've never met anyone who turned a murder attempt into a business opportunity," Michael had said during one of our first casual dinners. "Most people would have sold everything and moved to another state. Most people didn't have Thomas Crawford as a grandfather," I'd replied. Michael understood the difference between love and obsession, between protection and control. When criminals had threatened me, he'd stood between us. When reporters wanted to exploit my story, he'd helped me control my own narrative. When business success brought new challenges, he'd supported my decisions without trying to direct them. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on respect and shared experiences rather than manufactured romance. Michael had never shown the slightest interest in Dataflow Solutions' finances, but he'd spent hours listening to me talk about expanding our privacy protection services to underserved communities. "Bailey Crawford," he'd said when he proposed 6 months earlier, "you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I'd be honored to spend my life making sure you never have to face danger alone again." As I walked down the aisle toward Michael, I saw familiar faces in the pews. Chloe, now an award-winning investigative journalist, whose book about the Martinez family had become a bestseller. Tom Rodriguez, still my attorney, but now also a close friend who'd helped me establish the Thomas Crawford Foundation for Fraud Victim Assistance. Sarah Kim, Dataflow's brilliant CTO, who'd grown the company beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Detective Williams was there, along with several of the officers who'd arrested Sandra Martinez. Agent Patricia Torres sat in the front row, beaming with pride at her partner's happiness. But the most meaningful presence wasn't visible to anyone else. As I approached the altar, I felt my grandfather's spirit with me as strongly as I had on the day I'd inherited Dataflow Solutions. Thomas Crawford had protected me from gold diggers by teaching me to value integrity over money, substance over appearances, and genuine connection over manufactured romance. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Bailey and Michael, two people whose love has been tested by extraordinary circumstances and proven to be built on the strongest possible foundation: mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership." The ceremony was simple and elegant, attended by people who had earned their place in our lives through loyalty and courage, rather than convenience and manipulation. When Michael and I exchanged rings, the promises we made to each other carried the weight of everything we'd survived together. "I promise to stand with you in prosperity and adversity," I said, looking into Michael's honest brown eyes, "to build something lasting together and to never forget that true partnership means supporting each other's strength rather than exploiting each other's vulnerability." After the ceremony, the reception was held in the garden of a small winery owned by one of Dataflow's clients. As Michael and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I looked around at our guests and marveled at how different this celebration was from my first wedding. Derek's family had attended that wedding as part of their criminal conspiracy, pretending to celebrate while planning to steal everything I owned. Tonight's guests were here because they genuinely cared about Michael and me as people, not because they wanted anything from us. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked as we swayed to the music. "I'm thinking about how different this feels from last time," I said. "Everything about tonight is real. Everything about tonight is earned," Michael corrected gently. "Bailey, you've built a life based on the principles your grandfather taught you. This celebration is the result of choosing integrity over easy shortcuts." Later in the evening, I gave a brief speech to our wedding guests. 2 years ago, I thought love meant finding someone who made me feel safe and cherished. I began. I learned the hard way that predators are very good at simulating those feelings while hiding their true intentions. I paused looking at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. But I also learned something more important. Real love isn't about feeling safe. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with someone who has proven themselves worthy of that trust. It's about building something together that's stronger than either person could create alone. I gestured toward the guests. Everyone here tonight represents that kind of love. Friendship that survived crisis, professional relationships that became personal bonds, family connections that transcend biology. You've all chosen to be part of our lives, not because of what we could give you, but because of who we are together. The Thomas Crawford Foundation now helps hundreds of fraud victims every year recover their assets and rebuild their lives. Data Flow Solutions protects the private information of millions of people around the world. These aren't just business achievements. They're the result of choosing to transform pain into purpose, betrayal into justice, and personal healing into service to others. I raised my glass. My grandfather always said that the best revenge against people who try to destroy you is to build something so beautiful and lasting that their destructive efforts become footnotes in your success story. Tonight, surrounded by love that's been tested and proven genuine, I know that Sandra Martinez's attempts to destroy my life ultimately made it richer and more meaningful than I ever imagined possible. As our guests toasted and applauded, I felt a profound sense of completion. The scared young woman who'd been ambushed in her kitchen 2 years ago had become someone who could transform criminal targeting into business triumph, personal betrayal into deeper wisdom about love, and individual healing into service to other victims. The final life lesson had taken 2 years to fully understand. Trust must be earned through consistent actions over time, not romantic gestures or passionate declarations. True love supports your strength rather than exploiting your vulnerabilities. And the courage to fight injustice doesn't just save yourself. It protects countless others from suffering the same fate. My grandfather's wisdom about keeping my inheritance secret until I found genuine love had been perfectly validated. Derek's manufactured affection had crumbled under pressure, while Michael's steady partnership had grown stronger through every challenge we'd faced together. As Michael and I cut our wedding cake, I silently thanked Sandra Martinez for one thing. Her criminal conspiracy had taught me the difference between love and manipulation so clearly that I would never confuse them again. Data Flow Solutions now employed over 200 people and was valued at more than $100 million. The Thomas Crawford Foundation had helped recover over $30 million in stolen assets for fraud victims. My marriage to Michael was built on respect, trust, and shared commitment to protecting others from the kind of predators we defeated together. Sandra Martinez was serving life in prison without possibility of parole. Derek was working as an FBI consultant, helping to identify and stop inheritance fraud rings across the country. His genuine remorse and dedicated service to fraud victims had earned him a second chance at building a meaningful life. But the most important victory wasn't financial or legal. It was the knowledge that love built on truth and integrity could survive any challenge, while relationships built on deception and manipulation would always crumble when tested. As our wedding guests celebrated late into the evening, I knew that Thomas Crawford's greatest gift to me hadn't been Data Flow Solutions or $15 million. His greatest gift had been teaching me to recognize and choose authentic love over beautiful lies. Standing in Michael's arms, surrounded by people who had proven their loyalty through crisis and commitment, I finally understood what my grandfather had meant when he'd said, "I would know when someone loved me for who I was rather than what I owned." Real love didn't just accept my strength and independence, it celebrated and supported those qualities. Real love didn't try to access my resources. It helped me use those resources to make the world better for other people. And real love, once found and nurtured, was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. Have you ever had to question whether someone's feelings for you were genuine, or have you experienced a situation where trust needed to be rebuilt? From the ground up, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming betrayal and finding authentic love. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that surviving deception can lead to discovering genuine connection. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope my experience helps you recognize and cherish the real love in your own life. Now then, Bailey, let's discuss your inheritance one more time.